By 1941, things were just beginning to look up after the Great Depression when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. 9 out of 10 people never heard of Pearl Harbor. They had no idea where it was. The country was in a general state of pandemonium. The patriotism was running high, and pretty soon every man, woman, and child was pitching in to do their part. I joined the Navy, and this is my story. On December the 7th, 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. They caught us pretty much off balance, and as a result, they sunk quite a few of our ships, mainly most of our battleships, also shot up a lot of our aircraft and our airfields. Exactly 7 months and 3 days later, I was tending bar on Mount Adams in a place called The Hand. It was owned by my future mother and father-in-law. About 10 o'clock in the morning, my mother called me and said, "Bob, your greetings came." Well, in them days, when you got your greetings, that meant that you had a letter from the President of the United States. And it started off by saying, "Greetings. You have been selected to serve in the service of your country." Well, I immediately called my future mother-in-law, Gladys Fox, and asked her to come up and relieve me, and when she did, I went down and joined the Navy. This was about 11 o'clock in the morning. So I spent most of the day going through all the rigmarole, getting my physical and going through the regular routine, getting sworn in. And about 5 o'clock, I boarded a bus and headed to the depot where we caught a train that would take us up through Chicago to Great Lakes, Illinois, where we were a naval training station up there, where we spent our boot camp period of 6 weeks, about 4 weeks up there, I believe it was. Well, going up on the train, I got in a crap game and I lost what little money I had, which was only a couple of dollars. As a result, I wound up with 5 pennies in my pocket. So there's a fellow there wanted to go get his picture taken. It costs $1 to have your picture taken. So the place was about a mile away from where we were. So he asked me if I'd walk over and get our pictures taken. I told him I was broke. So he said he would pay for the picture. So I said, well, how about if I go with you, just give me the $1. He said, okay. So we walked over and we got his picture taken and he gave me the $1. And that was give me $1.05 now. So next morning, Monday, Chief Petty Officer come into the barracks. And he said, want to know if anybody had any experience as a supervisor of men. Well, during the induction part and getting our clothing, the fellow in front of me was named Connors. You do everything alphabetically. You line up alphabetically, you get your shots, you get your haircuts, everything is alphabetically. So Connors was an older fellow. He was, I think, 37. So him and I hit it off pretty good. And he was a salesman. He was from Dayton, Ohio. And his brother was a chaplain in World War I. It was also my father's chaplain in World War I. Connors, when his chief come in, he wanted everybody to put their hands up if they had any supervision experience. And he was asking the fellas what they did, you know. And when he come to Jake says he was a salesman. He had about 35 people working for him. So when he said to me, hey, Cunningham, what did you do? And Jake said he worked for me. So that was the name of that tune. I didn't have to answer or anything, you know. So they took all the ones that had the supervision experience and they made us square knot admirals. Jake was made a first class square knot and I was a second class, and then they also had a third class, which meant we had wore a patch on our arm, and we had a supervisor that worked with the cleaning of the barracks. We didn't have to stand any watch, or we didn't have to do any KP. Well, we got through boots pretty good. And boots camp was over, why, our last weekend there. Well, there was an incident there one time for a week. Every day I went to the chow hall, and you pick up a tray and you walk down through the line, and they dish this stuff out to you. And you always leave one spot. There was a corner spot on your tray that you left open to put the bread on. So every day, every meal I come down, the same guy with the bread, he had about 10 slices of bread on a long fork, and he had a knife, and he would just take 2 slices of bread and slide them off with a fork onto your tray. He would never, ever put them on the spot where they were supposed to be. So this was really getting to me, and towards the end of the week I made up my mind that this guy, he'd always put the bread right on top of your mashed potatoes or in your gravy or some other darn place. So during the course of the week, like I said, it was really getting to me. So this one day I'm going through and I got my tray and I'm watching the spot. I'm holding my tray with one hand and I got my fist, my right hand is underneath the tray. And if this guy puts his bread any place except where it belongs, I'm going to deck him. And by golly, he put it exactly where it was, and I was so surprised that I looked up, and here they had changed shifts, and the guy I was looking at was my cousin, Cliff Jones. And, of course, I didn't even know Cliff was in the Navy, and here we wind up in the same camp. And so Cliff told the rest of the fellas that from his outfit it was on KP that week to take care of me when I come through the. So for 1 week there, I had all the best pieces of meat and lived really high on a hog there. Well, I lost the track of Jake after that. I don't know where he shipped to, but they sent me down to Champaign, Illinois, to the University of Illinois to study diesel engineering. We had a couple of big, large buildings there that they put the sailors in. I think there was about 250 sailors down there. We had a big fence all around the place, and we had the run of the campus. And then over underneath the stadium, there was a place they'd set up where they had a bunch of diesel engines. They would take us over there for some shop work. An ensign was in charge of running the whole show there. We had about 15 chiefs that were 30-year men that were retired, and they called back as instructors. So this little ensign, he would get all dressed up with his whites. He put on a sword, and he wore white gloves, and he wore one of his fancy hats, like he's the only one I'd ever seen with one in the Navy. When we have inspection, why, he'd go around, on a Friday we had inspections, he'd go around and with these white gloves and pull jars out and rub on the bottom of them and all sorts of things. Any least little thing, why, he'd nail you for it. And of course he would confine you to the base, you know. You lost your liberty. So when I put on there I wanted to get the hell out of town, there had been some rowdiness in town with the sailors getting in fights, and this guy threatened to bring in the shore patrol. So that's why I said I didn't want any part of the shore patrol, and that was the reason I mentioned I would get the hell out of town away from the shore patrol. So anyway, I had a court-martial, and he said that was the same as me telling him to go to hell. But I don't know what his line of thinking was on that. Anyway, he gave me 1 day on bread and water. They sent me down to the brig, and he gave me 3 slices of bread and a bowl of water. Of course, I didn't mess with that because all my friends come down bringing me candy bars. And anyway, the next morning I was out of the brig, and I was walking around in the bum room down there. And this one chief named Hart's come in. He was a pretty good friend of mine, and he said he was getting up a church party. He asked me if I'd been to church. I said no, I couldn't go to church because I was restricted to the base over the weekend. So I said, no, he said, you can't restrict you to the base. Well, none of these chiefs like this ensign to begin with. They all outranked him, really. And he even made half of them stay on the base on a weekend. So I asked him what church party he was getting up, and he names him evangelical something or other. And so I said, that's me. He said, well, get in line there with the rest of us. Well, I'm getting ahead of my story again. That Saturday, I got in a crap game, and I won about $96. So here I am, I'm restricted to the base, and I got all this money. So about 8 o'clock, I went down by the back gate. It was a rainy, miserable, chilly night, and I knew the 2 guys that was on guard duty that just came on. So I told them, I said, let me sneak out of here, and I'll come back in a cab, and I'll bring you both a pint. They said, heck yeah, get the hell out of here. So off I went uptown, and I bought a bunch of half pints and a few pints, and I come back in a cab right away, and I give each one of them guys a pint. So then I went uptown and proceeded to have a ball. Everybody was happy. All the bars were full. So I come back about 11:45, come back in the gate, and these 2 guys were still there. They're happy as a lark, but I'm pretty well loaded. So the other 2 fellows come out to relieve them, and I made them the same proposition. Only this time I had 2 pints with me. I said, hey, I'll give you guys each a pint. Let me out of here, and I'll be back before you go off duty. Hell yeah, you know. So give each one of them a pint. And I went back uptown. I come back somewhere around 2 o'clock in the morning, and here these guys had fixed the bayonets on their rifles. They stuck them in the ground. They hung their raincoats on top of the rifles, and they were gone. Nobody was guarding the gate. So I don't know what happened to them two. They went over towards the stadium somewhere, I found out later. But anyway, that was the next morning is when they had a church party. But what I'd done that evening, that night before, was I bought a whole bag of whiskey and I put it in the locker. It's a Greyhound bus depot, and I forgot about it. So now I was trying to figure out how I was going to get to the Greyhound and get that whiskey out when this chief asked me about the church party. So anyway, I joined the church party and off we go. Well, we're walking along, and there was a building that had a pair of steps running up alongside of it. So when they made a hard turn, a hard left, I made a hard right, and I ducked under them steps. So while they're gone, I went over to the Greyhound and I got my whiskey. Then I stopped and I had another bag. These are big brown bags, like you carry your groceries home in. Full of half pints, and another one I got 6 ounce bottles of Coke, and filled them up. So now I'm back at this little, underneath this pair of steps. There was another couple of steps that led down into a basement room, and there was a little fruit stand down in there. So he had some ice cold watermelon sitting there, and the more I look at it, the more I wanted that watermelon. I was spitting cotton anyway. So I finally at the last minute when I could see these fellas coming, I bought a half a watermelon. So now I got a bag under each arm and a half a watermelon in between them. And of course when they all come marching by, I just got back in on the end of the line again. But the old chief, he's leading the parade. To get back to the school, well, he stops at the gate and lets everybody march in behind him. Well, here I come, the last guy, and I got all these 2 bags and this watermelon. Chief, he did a double take. He said, "What in the hell have you got there?" And I said, "I want us to go over to your quarters and I'll show you." So he took me over to the chief's quarters. There was about 7 or 8 chiefs in there, and I set this stuff down on the table, and they all liked it when they couldn't get over that, you know. On the day we left the university, there was, I think, 203 men left, and this Chief Hart was in charge of taking us all down to Norfolk. So we marched in a regular parade right down through the streets of Champaign. So anyway, we got down to the train station, and the chief gave us a little speech. He said he didn't care what the hell we did on the way down. If we got off at a train and didn't get back on, it was our fault. He said he's leaving there with 203 men, and he wanted 203 men when he pulled into Norfolk. And anybody that wasn't there was on his own and would be court-martialed. Oh, he finally got down to Norfolk, and they shipped me over to Little Creek, Virginia. And some of the fellows went to the Naval Operating Base, but anyway, there was about 50 of us went to Little Creek, and we were the first sailors in there. But it had been a Marine barracks at one time. Then I think the Army had it for a while. When we got there, all there was a big old large chow hall and a bunch of barracks, and the beds were made out of 2x4s and wire. You had to put your mattress on them. And half of the beds, there was at each end of the barracks there was a coal stove. So you had most of the bunks was already chopped up for firewood. They put us there and with no supervision at all. There wasn't no fence around the place or anything. So we stayed there for about 2 months. We didn't even get a paycheck. The only time we got any money was somebody would send home and get $5 or $10, and he'd take all of his buddies across the street from where the main gate was supposed to be. There was a beer joint, and they had Jake Rupert beer, and you bought it by the quart. So as soon as somebody got, I think it was like 20 cents a quart, and as soon as anybody got 5 or 10, well, he'd take his friends over, and then they'd blow it, and they'd hang around till the next guy got some money from home. But after a while, we settled down and got the base. They started moving more people in, and we finally got caught up with our back pay in. And they brought some LCTs in, and we trained on the LCTs. LCT is it's a small boat. It's not actually sea-going, although we did cross the Mediterranean with it. They're 35 feet wide and 105 feet long, and they're bolted together in 3 sections, and each section would float by itself if it come apart. And there was three main engines on them. They had 225 horsepower, gray marine engines. And then there was one four-cylinder engine. It was a Buddha engine that was run our generator for our electricity. The captain or the skipper had one small compartment for himself, and then we had another small room, about 5 foot square, for our bathroom, and all it consisted of was a shower stall, and it had a little basin there to get washed in, and of course the urinal and the toilet. And then we had the rest of the living quarters. We had 10 men in the crew besides the skipper. It was awful cramped, and that first winter down in Norfolk, it was got very cold. And then our generator went out on us. We never had no electricity, no way of keeping the thing warm inside, and of course the outside is like living inside of a metal box. Ice would form on the outside and then drip down to the sweat on the inside from our breath. And every morning you woke up with ice on your blankets. And it was pretty darn miserable there. Well, on the front of this LCT there was a ramp, a big gate that would let down, and on the stern of it there was a big 1,500-pound anchor that went with 600 feet of 1.125" cable. So when you went into a beach, you would drop your anchor maybe 300 feet off of the beach, and then as you went in, you could drop this ramp all at once. And these LCTs could carry 5 tanks or 5 Army 6x6 trucks. You could carry a lot of different things. And I spent about 27 months on one of them. I got to know it pretty doggone well. So we practiced landing and practiced how to steer the thing, and we got that all down pat. Then they put us on Mother's Day, 1943. They put us on a LST, which was the same type of ship, only bigger. This LST was 309 foot long and had a crew of about 70. Had big diesel engines like the kind you see on a train nowadays. It had 2 of them and 2 big screws. It also had the ramp in the front. Well, they took a big crane, a 125-ton crane, and could pick us up and set us up on the top deck of this LST. It was flat. There wasn't no superstructure on it, on the forward part. All the superstructure was on the aft end of it. So, it looked something like a tanker. So they took us from there to New York, and we formed a convoy and went across over and landed in Arzu, North Africa, right, a little small town near Oran. Well, it was 31 days from the time we left Norfolk until we landed in Oran, or Arzu. The first day we landed in Arzu, I had liberty. And it was really hot that day, and I left the ship at 1 o'clock. Went down the gangplank and went up towards the little town of Arzu, and about 2 blocks down the road, I false saloon. It was just thing was about 5 feet deep and about 10 foot long. Had one little skinny bar in there, and they had a girl with about 10 different bottles of wine. And there was an American soldier in there, so I went in, and I couldn't speak French, of course. So he ordered me a drink, and they were serving them, was all wine. They were serving it in a water glass. So I tried one of them. Well, first off, I had to get some money exchanged. Well, this guy, the money over there was like wallpaper, big bills. It was French money, and I think this soldier paid me for a few bucks there, but that didn't matter. Anyway, I tried a glass of like Vin Blanc, and then a glass of Vin Rouge, and shot of cognac, shot a glass of Muscatel, and maybe about 8 glasses of wine. So I asked him where the town was, and he said it's right up the street there, a couple of blocks. I could see it, you know. So I went outside, and I remember I stepped out in that bright sunlight again, and I remember turning around, and that was it. It was the last thing I remembered. a quarter to 2, I'm back along the gangplank, flat on my back. And a couple of my buddies spotted me dead laying there, and they hauled me aboard. About 7 o'clock I woke up, I took a drink of water and passed out again. I think I was loaded for 3 days. But after we was there a while, because all we drank was wine, and kind of got used to it. Well, you got to the point where you could drink it like the Frenchmen did almost. We moved from our zoo, we went over to Iran for a little bit, and then we went up to Algiers, and we spent quite a bit of time around Algiers. And then went up to Tunis and Lake Bizerti. We formed a convoy there, and then on July the 10th, we made the invasion. Well, actually the invasion was on July the 10th, 1943, of Sicily.
Husky, as the capture of Sicily was called in our code names, was an undertaking of the first magnitude. Although eclipsed by events in Normandy, its importance and its difficulties should not be underrated. In the initial assault, nearly 3,000 ships and landing craft took part, carrying between them 160,000 men, 14,000 vehicles, 600 tanks, and 1,800 guns. These forces had to be collected, trained, equipped, and eventually embarked with all the vast impedimenta of amphibious warfare. July 10th was the appointed day. On the morning of July 9th, the great armadas from east and west were converging south of Malta. It was time for all to steam for the beaches of Sicily. This was the greatest amphibious operation so far attempted in history. But all depended on the weather. The morning was fine, but by noon a fresh and unseasonably northwest wind sprang up. During the afternoon the wind increased, and by evening there was a heavy swell which threatened to make landings hazardous, particularly on the western beaches in the American sector. Landing craft convoys, plunging northward from Malta and from many African ports between Bizerti and Benghazi, were having a rough voyage. Arrangements had been made for postponing the landing in case of necessity, but a decision would have to be taken not later than midday. Watching anxiously from the Admiralty, the First Sea Lord inquired by signal about the weather conditions. Admiral Cunningham replied at 8 p.m. Weather not favorable, but operation proceeding. Many ships arrived late, but fortunately no great harm resulted. The bad weather helped to give us surprise. Admiral Cunningham continued. The vast efficient cover plan and deceptive routing of convoys played their part. In addition, the vigilance of the enemy was undoubtedly relaxed, owing to the unfavorable phase of the moon. Finally came this wind, dangerously close at the time to making some, if not all, of the landings impracticable.
July the 8th, we left Lake Bizerti, went out into the Mediterranean. We got about 2 days trip to getting across the thing. So when we left, it was nice and bright and sunny, about 10 o'clock in the morning, and by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the waves was kicking up so high. There was 4,000 ships in this convoy, by the way. It was the largest convoy in the history of the world up until this time. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we couldn't see a ship nowhere. They were all gone. And the waves were about 75 feet high, and this LCT I was on sits about 3 feet out of the water. So you go down in the belly of a wave, and you look around, all you can see all the way around is water. It's all the way up over you, up high. Then you come up on the top, and you look around, and you can see the tops of waves, and the wind was blowing. It was really, really nasty. Well, we had taken an extra skipper aboard, and our skipper turned his cabin over to the relief skipper. And then our skipper went up on top of the wheelhouse. He got a piece of canvas and a mattress, and he tied himself. We had him tie him on there. Well, he was sick. In fact, our cook had served us chili before we left, and everybody got deathly sick except me and a guy named Condon. So we actually took the LCT in for the invasion, just the two of us. Condon, I had experience. By this time, I was a boatsman mate. Condon was in what we called the black gang. He was the engineer, motor Mac, taking care of the engines, but I knew how to take care of them also. So what we'd do is, every now and then we'd run down and he'd check the engine room, I'd take the wheel. And after a while he'd come up and take the wheel, and I'd go back and check the engines. We just alternated night and day like that. We didn't sleep. And everybody else was passed out in their bed, in their bunks, called them a rack. And that went on all day, the 8th and the 9th. And you couldn't see anything all day long. At night, through breaks in the clouds, we could see the Big Dipper, and we hung on to it. And because our compass was spinning so bad, we tried to keep a course somewhere halfway between it, but it was swinging 30 degrees or more. So you couldn't hold a steady course by the compass, so we just hung on to the Dipper. Next night was the same thing, hang on to the Dipper, and we were supposed to hit the beach at 2 o'clock. Well, that fizzled out. There was nobody there to hit the beach. The bigger ships never had this kind of trouble, the battleships, and there was other ships there. D-Day was July the 10th, 1943, and HR was 2 o'clock in the morning. We didn't actually hit the beach until about 10 o'clock that morning. For one thing, we were the only LCT that made our landfall. We landed within about a mile of where we were supposed to land, which was pretty much of a miracle. And for the next couple of days, we never seen another LCT nowhere. And there should have been 100 of them or more around. And then too, the waves were running so high that when the bigger ships put the salt boats in the water, they called them a Higgins boat. There was 36-footers and 50-footers. They carried them in from the larger ships into the beach. Well, the waves were so high that when these small boats come into the beach, they were broached, and they all wound up broadside on the beach, and there wasn't room enough for us to come in. We couldn't find up and down the coast for a couple of miles. It was nothing but small boats that were all broached sideways in there. So I know we was laying anchored out a couple 100 feet away from the beach, and they were blowing these small boats. The Army had a demolition crew in there blowing these small boats out of the water. And I recall me and a guy named Ben Lohman, when they set off the dynamite, they had the old plunger like you see in the movies, and they plunged this thing down and had a dynamite under the engine. Well, these small boats had a big Raymarine engine in them, and I'll never forget, Ben Lohman and I were crouched down along the gunnel, and we had a pair of wooden steps made out of 2x6s. had about like 4 steps on it. And the pulley wheel off of this engine must have went about a half a mile up in the air and come down and right behind us, less than 2 feet away, and went right down through all 4 steps and put a big nick in our deck. Went right through. That'd be 4 pieces of, they were about like 2x10s, I guess. We had this about 2x10s maybe. And it went right through 4 of them and put a big dent in our deck. Finally, after they got to where we could get in, then we start unloading the other ships. And that went on for quite a while. I remember we had a kid named Bay. He was 16 years old. He was our signalman. He asked me if he could go ashore, and I said, yeah, but don't touch anything because the Germans had booby-trapped a lot of stuff. So old Bay, he walked off of the ship, and he went down about 200 feet down the beach, and there was a big explosion right about where he should have been. And I thought, oh, old Bay got into trouble already because he was that type of a guy. But luckily, it wasn't him. What had happened, there was a wooden box there, and it had hand grenades in it, and the Germans had it booby-trapped. There were some soldiers there. And Bay was about 20 feet away when the thing went off. He didn't get hurt, but 2 guys got killed, and another guy got his leg blown off. But that taught Bay a lesson. He didn't pick up nothing from then on. I remember one day there was a monitor. What they called a monitor was it's a British ship. It had 2 big 14-inch guns on it. And I was standing up on the bow of our ship. And this thing was about a mile behind me, this monitor, and it was firing 14-inch shells somewhere 4 or 5 miles back inland in German positions. Well, I was standing up there, and all of a sudden something pushed me forward, and my pants leg started shaking. And I heard this big swoosh, and I glanced up, and you could see 2 dark things flying through the sky, just like a smoky trail. And I looked back, and there was a big cloud of smoke coming up off of that monitor where she had fired, and every couple of minutes she had fired 2 more of them. That was the only 2 big guns she had, was 2 14-inchers. And pretty awesome, the power that one of those guns has. It's hard to believe, or the damage that it can do. And another thing too is how accurate they are. About the 3rd day, 2 soldiers come up in a Jeep, and I recognized them. They was helping us. We were bringing them guys some supplies in, and they asked me if I found 2 bazookas. Well, I didn't know what the hell a bazooka was, so they described it to me. And there we had found them like a day or so before, but we didn't know what they were. It looks like a piece of downspout. And here, that's what they needed. It was an anti-tank gun, the bazooka. And I had them kicking around up on the top side, and then I stuck them in a paint locker that we had up forward there. So I was reading a book about General Patton, and he mentioned in that book later on that he left, well, he said 75s. I don't know what caliber these things fired. He said, but he had 2 75s, and he had to send back to the beach to get them because there was, I think, about 12 small German tanks that had him pinned down. And here was these same 2 bazookas that I stuck in a paint locker. So when they come up, then they start knocking these tanks out right and left with them, and they went on through. But by and large, Sicily wasn't too bad. We did got a lot of straight in the Germans. We shot down one of the kids in my crew, Thomas Cleveland from Kansas City, shot down a ME-109. Mountain had a hump in it like, and he caught him coming through one side and gave him a blast with a 20 millimeter, and you could see him as he come by the other side. He was going down in smoke. We didn't actually see him crash, but we know he did. And we also shot down a couple of barrage balloons of our own. I remember one night I was on a gun, and at the same time the Germans were strafing, B-24s come over, dropping parachutes. They were supposed to drop the parachutes a mile inland, and they dropped them a mile at sea. And then their bodies come washing up for days after. And at the same time it was cloudy, and like I said, the Germans was there strapping, shooting up the beach. At the same time these liberators come through, and I was shooting at anything that moves by this time, and I remember I put 40 or 50 shots right into the B-24 before I realized what it was, you know. Or 50 shots right into the B-24 before I realized what it was, you know. Shot him up, I hope. Too late now. Somebody got hurt or killed or whatever, but the thing kept flying. I didn't knock it down anyway. And I remember one day, another day in the afternoon, we were getting strafed by the Germans. And we said, word came out to make smoke. Well, up on each side on the bow, the port and starboard bows, and on the stern on the port and starboard side, we had like 4 or 5 gallon cans. We had them tied on up there. And what it is to take this can, and it had a handle on it hooked to a wire. You take the can and hold onto the handle and throw the can overboard, and that activated the wire, pulled the tab loose, and when the can hit the water, it caused the chemicals in there to mix and make smoke. So we had never made smoke before. So this was the first time, and I remember I was on one bow, I was on the starboard bow, and I throwed one over, nothing happened. Throwed another one over, nothing happened, and the guy on the port bow is doing the same thing. He threw a couple over, nothing happened, and then we had a couple guys on the stern throwing them over. And I mean, all this while we're going in a circle down there, trying to dodge these planes as they're coming in. And we're hollering back and forth at each other that the doggone smoke, it wasn't making smoke, they weren't working, they were all duds. Well, about that time, they did start making smoke. And I tell you, man, one can or 2 cans would probably cover Mount Adams with smoke, and we had, hell, we must have had 10 cans in the water by this time. Man, we're all hacking and coughing. This lasted, I guess, 45 minutes to an hour before we finally, well, we learned our lesson on making smoke. Well, another thing too, about the 3rd day of the invasion, some Italian prisoners came in. What had happened was there was an American, and he was in a foxhole, and he got shot in the backside. He was laying in a little ditch like. And these 2 Italians come over. Well, he thought he had it, you know. But they got it across to him that they wanted to surrender. And so they picked him up and they started carrying him back. In the meantime, they're hollering in Italian at their friends here and there that was in hiding, you know, along the way. Well, as a result, by the time they got down to the beach, the soldiers got a whole parade of Italians following. So when they got down to the beach, they told them to throw their guns in a pile. Well, pretty soon the pile got about almost as big as when I get out of school. It was guns, and it got to the point where as each Italian come in to surrender, he would try to get his gun all the way to the top of the stack. But I think within about 4 days, it was something like 600,000 Italian prisoners. I only saw about 35 German prisoners. And for every German prisoner, there was a darn near an MP. It was darn near one-on-one. But the Italians, they were swarming all over the beach. I'll never forget one guy come in. He was stark naked, except he had a lampshade on. He was wearing a lampshade for a pair of shorts. And well, they were tickled to death to be captured, because for them the fighting was over. That part of Sicily where we landed at the Scoglietti, you know, right near Gela, is in the southern part of the island, and up around on the far corner, on the northern side of the island, is a city called Palermo. Well, somewhere between Scoglietti and Palermo, the Germans would send these Italians out to surrender, they would tie a handkerchief on the end of their rifles, and the Germans were in pillboxes or in dugouts, forcing the Italians out. If they didn't go out, they would shoot them. Well, when the Americans come forward to take an Italian prisoner, the German would shoot the American. So the word got out, and by the time we got to Palermo, they says, don't take any more German prisoners. And I wasn't at Palermo, but some of my friends went up there. And they said the streets of Palermo were red with the blood of the German prisoners. They just shot them all. They didn't take no more. And then there was a place called Anzio. Some of my friends got over to Anzio, but I didn't make that part of it. They come under heavy shell fire with the German 88s. Had them pinned down, and that got to be pretty hairy for them guys. Before we left Sicily, there was some jeeps. Thought it was material, like I say, all these guns and life jackets and life belts and all kind of odds and ends. The beaches were just covered with them, thousands and thousands of them. And there was a lot of trucks that got bogged down and some jeeps, so we decided we were going to take a jeep with us. So we had our ramp down, and we just run a jeep up and put it back on the corner of our deck and covered it over with a piece of tarpaulin. So we took it back over to North Africa with us, and we got back to Algiers, and like I say, we hung around there for a while, and finally they loaded us, 10 of us, 10 LCTs that is, they loaded them on the decks of 10 LSTs, and we headed out for India. We went over to the Mediterranean and into the Suez Canal, and we went down the Suez Canal and all the way down the Red Sea, down through Aden, stopped down at Aden, and then we went across. Our next stop was the island of, they call it Sri Lanka now. We stopped at the capital city, which is Colombo, which used to be Ceylon, the garnet capital of the world. We spent a few days there, and then we went on up to Calcutta. And we stayed at King George Docks. But on the way across, which is across all the way across down the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, that took us quite a while. So while we're underway, we painted our Jeep Battleship Gray, and we made some stencils and put USN on the Jeep and put some nice big numbers on it. And for all the world, it was an authentic Navy Jeep. Nobody could tell the difference. And while we were at it, we painted our LCT. I forgot to mention that this LCT I was on was number 461, and it was the ragamuffins of the 10 of us. And we were the guys that were always getting into trouble, and comparable to McHale's Navy. If we needed something, we'd go out at night and steal it. Or just like there was a bunch of sunken ships in Lake Bizerti. So we would go aboard these sunken ships and take their portals out. And like I mentioned before, when we were at Norfolk, it got so cold in the winter. Well, now we're over in the tropics, and it got just as hot. And the inside of the cruise quarters, you couldn't stand it because it was just like being inside of a metal tin can. And the cruise quarters was like 35 foot wide, about 8 foot high, and about 12 foot deep. Now that, like I say, we had our kitchen area, we had our dining area, we had bunks for 10 men, we had our bathroom, our head, and we had the skipper's quarters. So it was really a crowded affair. So what we did, on the back of the bulkhead, on the stern end of the ship, it was flat across back there. Everything hanging back there was our anchor. We cut big holes. Got a burning torch off the LSD, went up there, and before we left Africa, we went aboard these sunken ships and took the portholes out, including their armor cover. So now we got portholes that were 18 inches in diameter, big, heavy, thick glass, and they also had a armor cover place over him at night. Well, you couldn't shoot a bullet through it. And at the same time, it was good for the blackout. Because there was always, every night there was a blackout. It was still plenty hot. The day that we landed in Calcutta, we were strapped and bombed by the Japanese. They sent a bunch of Betty bombers over, and I think they were out to get us. Our convoy, which wasn't a very large one, 10 LSTs, and we had one gunboat running with us, a British gunboat. And we landed in Calcutta on Thanksgiving Day. We weren't, well, we went to, was in India, and we were running supplies from Calcutta. Well, we go down the Hooghly River, the Irrawaddy River, maybe 1,500 miles. There was a little town down there called Chittagong, down in the Siam. We were bringing in supplies, fighting in Burma, to these people that was fighting in Burma, and a lot of supplies for the Air Force, for these pilots that were flying the Hump, which is the Himalayan mountains, the highest mountains in the world. They were flying these and bringing supplies into China. Because the Chinese were also fighting the Japs at that time. And our people were bringing in supplies. They were building the Lido Road down there. The Japs had cut off the Burma Road. And our people down there were, some of them were, a lot of them were Merle's Marauders, and under Vinegar Joe Stilwell, and there was a lot of them were Flying Taggers, made it a part of our Air Force. And we had Air Force all over the place down there. The B-29s were based up in India, about 100 miles north of Calcutta. And Calcutta's quite a place. We had one of our men that was in the hospital for some reason or other, and what was Moore? When Moore was still in the hospital, and a couple of our guys went up to see him, and they got friendly with some of the American nurses. This was an Army hospital, and they got friendly with some of the nurses. Well, about that time, there was USO was having a dance up in at the USO, and anybody that had an escort was admitted, and it was mainly was for the officers, because most of the enlisted men had no way of getting an escort. So they let it be known that nobody was allowed into this dance without an escort. So two of our men, Lewis, and I forget the other fellow, two of them anyway, decided they would dress up as women, and two of our other guys would take them to the dance. So they went out to the hospital, and sure enough, the nurses had dresses for them, and high-heeled shoes, and they had wigs and the whole bit. And they put the makeup on them, the lipstick and the wigs, and dressed them all up, and they didn't look bad. They looked like a little course, like a couple of streetwalkers, but they passed. And let's see, Cleveland, Thomas Cleveland and Martin escorted Chickaroni and Lewis, that's what it was, and to the dance. Well, they were having a gay old time, and all these people were wondering where they got them two sluts, you know. Later on, they're walking down the street after the thing was all over. About towards the end, they let the cat out of the bag, you know. These two guys, well, they got a lot of notoriety out of it. On the next issue of Stars and Stripes, they were on the front page. But how they decided they were going to make that dance one way or the other, in which they did. Anyway, they're walking down one of the streets in Calcutta, and some English sailor pinched Chick on the backside, and Chick brought one up from the curb, and to this day, that guy don't know what hit him. That's why I say on the way out, we painted the Jeep, and we painted our LCT. Well, the fellow that was in charge of us was a man named Olson, Lieutenant Olson. He was in charge of the whole bunch, and of course, he didn't know we had painted it. We had our old rust bucket when we went aboard, and by the time we got to Calcutta, we had it looking like a brand new one. And boy, he was tickled to death with us then, you know. He forgave us for a lot of our pranks and things that but he still never knew we had that Jeep. And we kept that Jeep. There was a clump of trees right near where we were docked. There was an old building about like a garage, and we kept the Jeep right behind there. And anytime we wanted to go uptown, which was, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 miles away, why, we'd just hop in the Jeep and off we'd go, usually 4 or 5 guys. And one night, there was 5 of them was in it, going down Chowringhee Street. They was all drunk and running wide open, and they hit a streetcar broadside, knocked the wheels right out from under the streetcar. And of course, these guys were flying all over the place. Every one of them went up over the roof of the streetcar. And of course, the streetcars out there are not big like they hit around here. And I remember they had a court-martial, and I had to go to the court-martial. They had all the big wigs there, and we all sort of had a story made up of what we were going to say. But then word got out that you might as well tell the truth, because they're going to find out one way or another. And I could see why. When we went into the room, there was a big table about 15 feet across, and they had officers sitting all around it, and they had a chair for you, and they took turns firing questions at you. And these guys were colonels and commanders and full captains and everything else, so they finally got out the true story. And what they did, they just fined these guys a total of $420, because the brand new Jeep cost $420. And I guess the Army took care of the streetcar. But we never ever mentioned the other Jeep. In the meantime, I forgot to mention, a lot of times you want to go to town and the Jeep was gone already, and it was a long ride in a rickshaw to get up there. We went and sold another Jeep, and we painted it gray. Now we got 2 of them. We used to take them to and they had their trucks and things, And if we needed any work on it, we'd get them soldiers to fix them for us, and we'd slip them some cigarettes or something that they had trouble getting. And they kept us full of gas all the time and changed our plugs or whatever, and they treated us real nice, as far as taking care of the Jeep. But now we got down to 1 Jeep, so we was kind of careful with it. We didn't want to have them officers spotting us, running around up there. So sometimes I recall one trip we went down to, it was in Chittagong, a little town way out in the boonies, and there was a theater there, an old 3-bag show house, and it was a bunch of GIs. There was a line of GIs 3 blocks long trying to get in the darn thing. It was around 7 o'clock or so. It just started to get dark. By this time, we were wearing khakis. We never wore our uniforms anymore. We had Army khakis on because we were the only sailor stationed in Calcutta. And we had to buy, we couldn't buy any uniforms, so they said we could wear Army khakis. So we had Army outfits on us, Army overseas hat, So this particular night, there was all these soldiers was lined up, and then there was another entrance right down the street a little bit further, was for officers. The officers had the balcony all to themselves. So we went around the corner, and there was a little store there, and they had all kind of odds and ends in it, a little knick-knack store. So we all went in, and we all got lieutenant's bars, captain's bars. I remember Martin even had he was a general. He put a star on each shoulder, and a star on his lapels. So now we go up, and we got a general, and it looks like the rest of us are his aides, and he just goes right to the head of the officers' line, and on up into the thing we went. So we got there, the show had already started, and it was all dark. So they run off like they had the Pathé News and the comics, and then they have a break, they have an intermission. See, they usually have a bar where you go out in the lobby and have a drink, And during that time, if you don't want to drink, they had some slides that they would put up advertising hair tonic and mosquito bite cures and gin and different things that they sold around town. Well, anyway, when the lights come on, who do you think old Martin is sitting next to? Or Lieutenant Olson. He looks over at Martin and he did a double thing. He said, "Oh, I see you outrank me now." So he looked over there. I was next to Martin, and I was a lieutenant. And then next to me, I don't know, there was a captain, and then we had another lieutenant. You know, like a first lieutenant, a second lieutenant. But he got a big kick out of it. He really liked that. So he had ingenuity, I guess. But on one of these trips down the rivers, we always took a pilot with us because you could very well get lost because the deltas of some of these rivers were so wide, and there would be 6 or 8 rivers coming into it from all directions, and you had to know which one to take, and there was no signs of any kind up, you know. And then other times the river, like the Hooghly or the Irrawaddy, would be like the Licking River over there, where you're making a bend and the bow is scraping on one bank and the stern scraping on the other. And then again, it would get so wide that you couldn't even see across it. All you could see was water, like you're out in the middle of the ocean again. And then there were times when the tide would run so high and low that you'd be riding along, or you'd anchor for the night, and you wake up the next morning, you're sitting high and dry, there ain't no water nowhere, maybe a little puddle here and there. Then we jump out and scrape barnacles. The barnacles are little things about as big as the tip of your finger that fasten themselves onto your ship. The more of them they are, why, it slows you down on the water. It cuts your speed down pretty much, and you're carrying that extra weight all the time. And of course, the one with the less barnacles, these LCTs were forever racing each other with them. Trying to get back to port first, because whoever got there first had the best place to dock and had to pick a whatever, you know. So as a result, we'd always, every time we'd find ourselves in a spot where we're high and dry, well, we'd all hop over the side and start scraping barnacles. On these trips down the river to bring in supplies, we used to bring in all kind of supplies. It was hard to tell. Never ever did the same thing twice. One time we had a bunch of trailers, like tractors and trailers, and underneath the trailers we had 50-gallon drums of aviation gasoline. Because the Air Force had no way of getting gas in down there unless they flew it in their planes, or we brought it down on the LCTs. I recall one time we had about 6 cement mixers as part of our load, and these cement mixers was pretty good size, and they had electric, each one had electric or a gasoline engine on it, and they had a trough where you would pour the water or put the sand and the cement into this trough and mix it up. Then you pour water in there, and then you could raise the trough up, and it would dump it into the mixture itself. So we get the bright idea we could wash our clothes in that thing. So we put some water in there and some soap and cranked it up, and sure enough, it did a real good job, just like a wash machine. So then it was awful hot. It was way over 100 degrees every day. And so then we pumped some river water into this scoop. We just leave the scoop down. The scoop was about, maybe 4 foot square, about 15 inches high. So we just filled the scoop up with water. We had a little swimming pool there for us. Place to hop in the water and cool off a little bit. But we brought in all kind of stuff, telephone poles and wire and anything they needed to build a town with or an airstrip, we brought it in. I remember first day we got, second day it was, after we landed in Calcutta, I noticed over at the edge of the water in the harbor, there was a bunch of Indian women, and they were all in a semicircle around the shore there, and they all had what appeared to be like a dish towel. And they all had a tin can, like a number 10 can. One like we call a gallon can. And they would take the towel and spread it out on the water, and then bring it towards them, and then bring it out into the can. And we couldn't figure out what the hell they were up to. So we watched them for quite a while. Finally, we found out later on what they were doing was skimming oil off of the top of the water. And then they would strain it into that can and pour the water off of the can, and then they wound up with pure oil. And then their homes in this particular area, each home was like a little one-room brick house, looked more like a smokehouse than anything. It was a fairly small doorway, and it had a chimney in it, and it had a small window. Well, at night, they had another can, and they kept it full of rags and waste. Waste was like a cotton material, and they would pour this oil on this material and set it on fire. Well, it wouldn't burn out right; it would just smolder and smoke, and it made a lot of smoke. And it wouldn't. And of course, these people slept on the floor, and the smoke would fill up the house and it would keep the mosquitoes away. So they was going through all this work just to keep the house free of mosquitoes at night, because the mosquitoes were something fierce over there. Well, I think probably maybe one of the reasons would help the mosquitoes was the monsoons. Well, monsoon is a rainy season. And I recall many times we go to a movie and there ain't no sign of rain. When you come out there, the water in the streets would be 4 and 5 feet deep. You had to swim away. And this would be a nightly occurrence and a daily occurrence during the monsoon season. It was just like somebody turning a shower on, let it run full blast for a little bit, and then turning it off. Then, like in the daytime, the sun would come out, everything would dry up and get real steamy, and the heat was unbearable. About the time everything dried, the showers would start up again, and this rain would come down and like you've never seen before. And this would go on for like 3 months. All the time I was in India, I had prickly heat. And that was from the perspiration and drying out and being damp all the time. And of course, I lost a lot of weight. I got all the way down to about 135 or so, versus 220 when I went in. In India, you could buy a lot of things in town at these big markets. And I was up there one day, me and a couple other fellows, and we're looking around, and the guy had some rings there, a little jewelry store, like sort of open air affair. So I thought, well, I'll get Mom a wedding ring there. So I went and bought a wedding ring, and I had it engraved from REC to MTF forever. And this is a 24 karat gold, orange gold. It was Indian gold. It's a higher class gold than we have here, our yellow gold, you know. So I just put it in an envelope with a letter, and I mailed it, and sure enough, she got it. Come away all through the mails. And that's the wedding ring that she's wearing today, about 45 years later. I remember one night, we had our Jeep, like I say, and a bunch of us was sitting around drinking there, and we get the bright idea we'll go up to the Taj Mahal, which is quite a bit north of Calcutta, and it's in a place called Agra. So I think there was 4 of us. So we took off about 7 or 8 o'clock, and it was getting dark. Well, there was a blackout. You never see any lights, except the headlights on a Jeep. They tape them over, and you leave just a little square, about an inch square, or maybe about 3/4 high and about an inch and a half wide. And that's the only light you get. And that's, you don't see much with it if you're driving, but somebody can see you coming a little bit, but they couldn't see you from the airplanes, and that's what it's mainly for. So anyway, we all piled in a Jeep and off we went. And we drove and drove and drove. We didn't know where we were. We knew we was heading north, thought we were anyhow. So finally after, maybe 3 hours or so, we couldn't tell where we were. We had no idea. Sometimes we were on the road, sometimes we were off of it. And this particular time we were off of the road. So we said, hey, let's call it a halt and we'll just sleep here. Tomorrow we'll take off again, you know. So immediately I think we all just about fell asleep. Well, we woke up the next morning, and whatever we were in, I don't know if it was a graveyard or what, but I remember when we come through, we drove through things sort of shaped like a gold post, and he had a fancy big bar across the like of his big ornate thing, and I think it was a burying ground of some sort. But anyway, about 12 feet in front of us was a cliff, right where we stopped the Jeep. If we hadn't stopped at that instant, all four of us would have probably been killed. So this thing went down about 150 or 200 feet, and it was straight down. So we woke up and we all took a look at that. Well, that sort of made us decide we're going back down to Calcutta to forget the Taj Mahal. That was as close as I ever came to seeing the Taj Mahal outside of pictures of it. But that was really something. And there's beggars in India. Every place you go, there's beggars. There's professional beggars, young kids. A lot of them had bones that were broken when they were babies, and they never take them to a doctor. They grow back. They're offset. They're not pulled together or anything, and they're horribly deformed. And then there's all kind of elephantitis going around. That's where their ankles swell up. And I've seen a kid kicking a can down the street with one foot was all right, and the other one had elephantitis in it. And his ankle swells up so bad you can't see their toes. It's all leg, and it usually starts from the knee, and it's sort of like a tree trunk, and it just sort of goes down until you can't see the foot at all, just a big fat leg. And I've seen a kid in Bombay. He was about 12 years old, and he looked like he weighed about 12 pounds. This guy couldn't have been more than 6 inches in diameter. He just had a cup on him, and it looked like a little diaper, like a small diaper, and that was it. And he was a beggar, of course. And he had a little thing on his head, like not a turban, but some kind of a little thing he wore on his head. I think one of the, there was another fellow I saw. I didn't see him, but I saw a picture of him. In fact, I think I might have brought one home. But this fellow laying in a hospital bed, and his testicles were swelled up. And this guy's testicles was, much larger than a bushel basket. And it showed him, before he got into the hospital, he would carry him in a wheelbarrow, push him in front of him in a wheelbarrow. And I don't know what kind of disease he had, but it's hard to believe anything as gruesome as that. Down in the rivers, and we used to, I think I mentioned before, that we used to anchor in the middle of the river at night, because we never traveled at night. But we'd anchor in the middle of the river, and we used to try to anchor near a village all the time. And of course, that was give us guys something to do. We could go ashore sometimes and talk with the people, and it was something, create a little activity for them, because they live way out in the boonies, nothing around. I know sometimes at night, they had these jungle drums going, like they had in Africa. And you hear these bong, 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 bong. And you get all these vibrations and signals. And we always had the impression that they were signaling to the Japs that we were in the vicinity. I don't know what the hell they could have been talking about. That was our impression of it anyway. I know one night there was about 4 guys, and they were fishing. They had a little, what we called a pirogue, was sort of like a canoe. 2 guys in there, and they had 2 guys over on the shore, and they had a big long net, and the 2 guys on the shore would hold the net, and the 2 guys in the boat, they would row in a big circle and come back into them. So we told them to bring the net, leave them guys on the shore, bring the net over, and we would tie it off on our ship. And we had a deck we could work off of. It was about 3 foot wide and about 3 foot up out of the water, and it was about 90 feet long. So we had plenty of room to work off of it there. And of course, then we also had our big blinker light. So I remember these 2 guys, they thought that was the greatest thing ever happened to them. See, it was a big break for them. So they went out and they rode all around. They come back and they brought the net back to us. So now we're pulling the net up. And when we get it almost all the way in, one guy said, "No, give us a high sign to wait a minute." And he reached down in the net and he come up with a handful of snakes, about like 10 of them. And he'd just pick them up and throw them back in the water, and he would reach down in that net again and come up with another big handful. And these are snakes 3, 4, 5 feet long, like a half-inch thick, up to about an inch thick. They were all different colors. Some had red and black rings going around them. Some had stripes going long ways on them. Some had diamond shapes on them, and some had looked like checkerboards. There was all kinds of them. They would just pick them up and fling them back in the river again. And I thought, how in the hell come this guy ain't getting bit? It was unbelievable. But anyway, then we would pull the nets in for him, and they were fishing for some kind of a little fish about like a sardine. So I guess it probably was a sardine, I guess. But anyway, by us helping them, they could go a lot faster. They could see what they were doing, you know, because it was dark, and they really appreciated that. I remember back in Calcutta, we was anchored at King George docks, and it was in the afternoon, and people weren't allowed to fish for some reason. I don't know what the idea was, but maybe the guy never had a license. But anyway, there was a guy come down and he had a big net, and we told him if he wanted to fish, he could fish off at the stern of the ship, see, out where the water was deeper. So, well, he was tickled to death. See, so he went out there and he took this net, and he had a long rope on it, and the net was all coiled up, and he just keeps spinning it around his head, and all of a sudden he just let it go, and this net had spread out just like a big parachute. And then it have weights all around the edges of it. And this thing was about 20 feet in diameter, and right in the middle was a rope tied to it. And then these weights would all sink down, and then he would pull it back up. And every time he pulled it up, he'd have about 6 or 8 fish in there. And I remember back in the Bible days, they said when the fishermen on the Red Sea would cast their nets. That was the type of net. You often wonder how they cast a net. Well, that's exactly what these fellows was doing. It was the same type of a net that they used back in the days of when Christ walked the earth. You see, like I said, you see so many strange sights. And these Indians, by and large, are small people. I recall one time when we were in Bombay, after I got out of the hospital, and here comes 4 guys down the street, and they had a piano on their heads. It was upside down. They had the back of the piano sitting on top of their heads. Each one of these guys had looked like a little dish towel they always wore on top of their head. And they would walk along, and then one guy was calling cadence, you know, hep 2, 3, 4, hep 2, 3, and they all walk right along just as smooth as anything. All of a sudden you'd call for a halt, and they'd stop and take a rest with the piano on their head. They'd stand there for a little bit. And we was wondering how in the hell they got it up and how they're going to get it off. And we followed them guys for about a mile. I don't know where they were taking it to, but every so often they'd just stop, take a little rest, and take off again. And to this day, I don't know how they got it up or how they got it off. But we've seen that a couple of times later on. In fact, one time they had some kind of a radio show or a television show in the early days of television, and the name of the program was You Ask For It. And they was asking for all strange things around the country. And I think I seen every show that they'd ever made. So I wrote in and asked them to see that. They sent back a note saying that they'd already shown it. Well, I know damn right well they hadn't. But it was really remarkable. And in fact, the day I left Calcutta, I was so sick. We got down to the train station that I couldn't lift my sea bag. And I also had a great big monstrous suitcase that I kept for many years. I brought all the way home with me. And I had a sea bag that weighed about 100 pounds or 120 pounds. And I had this big suitcase full of stuff, and I had a ditty bag. And out of the 3 of them, I was lucky if I could carry the ditty bag because I was so weak. So as soon as I got to the depot, some of my buddies unloaded the bags off of the truck. Well, then there's an Indian porters there. And there's a little guy who weighs about 80 pounds. And he squats down. They all had this little towel wrapped around their head. And this guy squats down, and we set first the suitcase on his head, flat. And then on top of the suitcase, we set the sea bag. And then he said to put the ditty bag on top of that. This little guy got up and off he went. And he carried that, maybe a quarter of a mile or so down the platform to where we got in our car. And the car incidentally was like you see in the parades, them 40 and 8 things, you know. All it was an old wooden car with wooden benches down the middle. Running long ways down the middle, one bench facing one way and one the other way, and that was it. It was the only benches. We spent most of the time just laying on the floor of the darn thing. We had to ride that halfway, a little bit better than halfway across India. This train I was on was about a mile long, and the stations were about a mile apart. So as a result, why the engine would be on one station and the caboose would be in the last one. And at every station that stopped, there was hundreds of beggars. Well, you try to give them what you could, you know, at first, but after 10 or 15 stops, while you run out of stuff to give them, you just feel sorry for them. I mentioned before how badly misshapen most of them were. And then, of course, there was some of them are professional beggars. That's the only way they have of making a living. In India, everything was valuable, even an old tin can. Anything, stuff we throw away day in and day out, we take for granted, to them is valuable. I tell you, when we got to Nagpur, which was a city about halfway across India, so they said we could all go up there and get a drink, you know. So we went into this club, and it was more like a big bar room, the part of it that we could see. So we went in there, and of course they have this Tiger brand gin and palm tree gin, all kinds of different gins, and we was throwing that gin in as fast as we could. And like I said, when I get on the train, I was really sick, and I was getting worse by the day. So I was trying to knock myself out a little bit and kind of make it a little bit easier for me for the rest of the trip. And as a result, come time to leave, I was the last one in the saloon, to make a long story short. And I asked the bartender, you always ask them if they have any American. Well, you ask that so many times you forget about it because nobody has any American. So I asked him if he had any English whiskey or gin. And he said, no. He said, but he had some Canadian whiskey. And I said, well, is it any good? And he said, well, some of the officers drink it. And I said, what kind is it? And he said, it's Canadian Club. And he started looking around under the bar. And he come up with a whole case of Canadian Club. I like that fell off of the stool. And he set a bottle up on the bar, and it had a little booklet on the top. I recall, and they had a little gold and blue tassel, like a tassel hanging there, and a little booklet with directions on how to mix drinks and things. So I asked him to pour me a shot, and he poured me a shot, and it was the real McCoy. It was Canadian Club. So then I took all the money I had, or just about all I had, and I said, just keep filling it up. In the meantime, the train whistle, they knew I was missing, and they're blowing for me. And the train whistle down there going, toot, 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 toot. They're ready to take off, you know. And finally can try to buy a bottle. And he said he couldn't sell it that way, it's against the law. But he could pour me shots, and I could take them with me. So he had two little pop bottles, about as big as a small Coke bottle, and the kind, they used to have a little marble about that big on the top, and a little wire where you could flip it up, and that marble, you could seal it that way. So he filled the both of them up with whiskey, and I had a couple more shots, as many as I could gulp down real quick, and I started out the door, and he said, wait, you got to pay deposit on the bottles. And this is why I say things to them are valuable, because he knew them 2 bottles were going to leave town, and he'd never see them again. So I wind up paying more for the deposit than I did for the whiskey. But anyway, I think the whole thing probably cost about $20 American, or maybe less. It probably was everything I had, you know. But anyway, I run down and got on the train, and I had two friends on the train. Two of my best buddies have been with them all through the war. Mark and Lynn Tanksley, twin brothers from Nashville, Tennessee. In fact, I just talked to both of them on the phone about a year ago. I was in Nashville. I didn't get to see them, but I did talk to them. And anyway, I got them on. I got them two guys on the side, and I said, I got a pop bottle full of Canadian Club. And I'll sell it to you for $25. Well, they couldn't believe it, so I give them a sip. Well, they couldn't get the $25 out of their pocket fast enough. So they drank that one between them, and I drank the other one. So when we got into Bombay, shortly after that, we got on what they called the electric train. It was a pretty modern train, and it was powered by electricity. It had wires overhead, like our streetcars. And this thing would zip right along about 60 miles an hour, whereas this 40 and 8 type thing would made 30 miles an hour at any one time, and it was doing good. So the rest of the trip, well, it was about the same distance almost as the first. It took way less time, about half the time. And we got into Bombay, and we got set up someplace in a base. And then I turned myself into the hospital, an Army hospital, and I spent about 4 days in the hospital and got my strength back and come out of the hospital in time to ship out with them. I only had a few days after that in Bombay to roam around and see the town a little bit. But anyway, we left on an English ship, and this ship had been in a wreck, and the whole bow was sort of smashed in, and they had it propped up, and they were going to take it back to Liverpool, England, to have it worked on, reinforced, and put in dry dock back there. But they said they'd probably make it if they ever had no trouble, you know. So anyway, we saw out across the Indian Ocean with that thing, and things was going along pretty good. I remember one day we were going to have fish, and I was down on the main deck, and the cook would take these big fish, take them right out of the deep freeze, in a walk-in freezer. And this was a fish about 10 inches around and about 8 feet long. And he laid them out on the deck and took a fire axe and started whacking these things up in about pieces 3 foot long. And I mean, not quite that long, maybe about 15 inches long. And he didn't even rinse them off or anything. They had splinters stuck in them. And he put them in some pans, and they shoved them right on in the oven, just like they were. And he must have had about 10 fish like that. He chopped all up. And that didn't appeal to me. I didn't eat fish that day. But one day, shortly after that, we were eating by ourselves, and we were the only passengers on the ship. This was a big luxury. It had been a luxury liner at one time. And the 110 Americans was the only ones that was on it, you know. As passengers, and there was the ship's company. I remember one time at dinner, we had a salad, and I was waiting on something, and I was talking, and I had my fork, and I flipped over the piece of lettuce, and there was maggots underneath it. So I kept the guy next to me, and I said, "Look at your lettuce. What are your salad?" So the first thing you know, everybody at all the tables there started looking at their salads, and then we was really squawking, you know, because the food up until this time they hadn't been too good. So I went and got our commander, and I showed him there's maggots on here. See, and the United States is paying this ship's owner or ship's captains, I guess. They were paying him, I don't know how much a day, but it was we weren't eating nearly what he was getting paid. So anyway, from then on, the food improved a lot. And up on the top side, way up high on the ship, there was a lounge room up there. It was what we call it a bum room. And there was one big room that had a bar in it. And Americans, we could go up there and buy rum. But they would only sell us like 4 shots a day or something like that. But it was a place, and it was only open a few hours in the afternoon, you know, but something to break the monotony, and we could go up there and have a few drinks, and it worked out pretty good. So anyway, we get across the the Indian Ocean. We going up the Red Sea, and they had us put out the word to get in our whites, and we're going to have an inspection. So we were on the second deck, and it was the first deck below the main deck, which originally had been like the dance floor or the party room, you know, when it was a luxury liner. So right at the end of this, the end closest to where we were, was a big wide double staircase that went up, and then there was one underneath it, up and down, you know. Beautiful, beautiful woodwork and everything, big wide stairs. So I was the closest one to the stairs, and I was standing off to the side because I was in charge of my group of men. And they had all 10 groups of us lined up there. And pretty soon here comes the captain of the ship and all his officers. They're all dressed up. And here comes our own officers, and they're all dressed up. You know, what the hell's going on here, you know? So they come down, and they're standing there having the inspection, and pretty soon they sort of step back, and it ain't saying much. And everybody's sort of eyeballing each other, figure what, nobody knows what's going on, you know, or we didn't anyway. So about that time, there was a big explosion, a big, and the old ship just started shaking, you know. Well, I'm looking at this captain of the ship, and he doesn't make a move, and none of the officers are making a move. And all our men are eyeballing that stairway. So I thought, well, I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to be the first one up them steps, you know. So about that time, there was a second explosion. The first one come off of the bow, and I thought, everybody thought we caught a torpedo. And then I thought, well, maybe that front end, that was on everybody's mind too. Are we going to make it with this damaged bow on this thing, you know? So that was on everybody's mind. But about the time everybody started to settle down a little bit, because none of the officers were making a move, but it was a second explosion. Another, the ship just shuddered, you know. And this one was louder than the first one and bigger. And with that, the captain of the ship says, "Happy holiday, Yanks. It's your 4th of July." Well, somewhere along the line about that time, we had one of our own cooks was working in ship's company. He was working on the Limey ship as a cook. And he worked at night, so he was allowed to sleep in the daytime. So he had himself a spot picked out down below deck somewhere where he would sack out in the daytime. And of course, he had all of his belongings with him down there. Well, this guy comes flying up, and he had a small suitcase with him. And he comes up over the steps, and he makes a turn around one ladder, and he's running up. And as he went around the swinging up, going up the steps where we were, his suitcase come open, and everything he had went flying across the decks, you know. And it headed out towards the officers. All of his clothes and his valuables and his souvenirs and everything what he had went sliding across the deck, and this guy goes about halfway up the steps, and he turns around and he looks. And he thought, what the hell's going on here? You know, he's standing there with a suitcase all flopping open. He's in his underwear. And, of course, we all laughing like crazy by that, you know. But so anyway, we took that ship into Cairo. He got off in Cairo, and I only went into Cairo one night, me and another guy, and Thomas Cleveland. We got 2 quarts of beer in a nightclub. Well, that beer was about as strong as our whiskey, it seemed like. Because 1 quart was about all you could drink, and we finally got back to the base, but we didn't bother going up because they had American beer on this base. It was a airfield. And I think they had a B-29 parked there behind the hangar, and they had guards all around it. Nobody could get near it. And I heard that it was the Enola Gay. That was the plane that dropped a bomb at Hiroshima later on. And it was working its way out. That's where they would go from there to Karachi in India. And there was a B-29 base about 100 miles north of Calcutta. So this particular plane was being refitted or whatever, I don't know. But it was the one, and you could tell it was a monster because the tail of it was sticking higher than the hangar. And in them days, they didn't build planes like that, you know, or up until then. So anyway, About half of the guys in my crew the next day went over to the pyramids. Pyramids was about 15 miles away, and they were gone. They come back and I said, "Well, what do you think? Is it worth going to see?" And they said, "Nah, just a pile of rocks." So like I said, they had American beer on this place, and you could have all you wanted. So I was there for 15 days and never left the base, which was pretty rare. But uh, that's one thing I regret, that I never went to see the pyramids, as close as I was. I wish now that I had gone, even though it was a pile of rocks. But I'd seen a lot of things. I didn't actually see where the whole of Calcutta was, although I passed within 200 feet of it many a times and didn't bother to go look at it. You know, it was a building down the end of a little alley right off of the main drag down there. The black hole was where I don't know, they took some I think they were Indian prisoners, and they kept shoving them into this one room. And it was a night when the temperature was like over 100 degrees, and they kept pushing these guys in and pushing them in until they finally had to wedge the doors closed to get them all in. Well, the next day when they opened the doors, they were all dead. And that's where it got its name, was the black hole. Never had nothing to do with a hole in the ground or anything. It was just a room, like a sort of a prison room, which I spent one night in Algiers. I don't know if I had mentioned that earlier or not, but I wouldn't want to. This was a French garrison prison. It was from the French Foreign Legion, one of them types. Well, anyway, got to Bombay, and then after we left Bombay, or to Cairo rather, went from Bombay to Cairo by ship, and then in Cairo we got a airplane, C-46, and we're flying out over the Mediterranean, and we're heading to Tunis. I believe it was Tunis where we went. Algiers, I don't know, forget exactly where we were headed. But anyway, we landed in Benghazi. Well, at one point, we're out over the Mediterranean, and the guy across from me is giving me a high sign, and his eyes are as big as dollars, and he's pointing out the window. And I reached over and looked out the window, and here the propeller would stop. This plane only had two engines, you know, and there was the old propeller standing straight up and down. I went up and banged on the door of the cockpit, you know. There was three men up in there, and they said, "What do you want?" And I said, "Hey, the starboard engine quit." And they laughed like crazy, you know, because we never. Well, we was all scared by this time, you know, because we never had no parachutes, no anything, no life jackets. And he said, "No, we're just giving it a rest." But then I found out we could fly with one engine. Anyway, we landed at Benghazi. That's over in. But we went from Benghazi to Tripoli. That's where this guy Gaddafi lives right now. It was in his country. Of course, then they were friendly. And as we landed, we're going down the runway, and it felt like we run over a rock, a big boulder. There was a thump, the plane gave a jerk. Well, it felt to me exactly like we run over a big boulder. But anyway, what it was, we had a flat tire. So we needed to get a wing jack. I'm not sure if we were in Benghazi and went to Tripoli, or if we were in Tripoli and went to Benghazi. But I think it was Benghazi to Tripoli. So we got an army jeep, and there was two guys from the plane, the plane's crew, and me and Chalstraw got in the jeep. And the four of us went to Tripoli to get a wing jack. And all the way to Tripoli, it was like a dirt road, you know, hard road. And I forget how far it was, over 100 miles. And for that entire distance, you could hardly throw a rock on either side of the road without hitting a German tank or a German truck or a German vehicle, even a couple of airplanes. In that entire distance. And that was Rommel's, the Desert Fox. As he was retreating, he would run out of gas, and they'd just push these things off of the road. And they were laying all over him. You can't begin to believe how much equipment he left behind. millions and millions of tons. It was all good, except it just ran out of gas. So anyway, we got the wing jack and they come on back. I remember on the way back, we had our rifles with us, and we just stopped to take a little break, stretch our legs there one day. And I remember there was a wrist pin, it was about that big, out of an aircraft engine, and it was about that big around. And the wrist pin is what holds the piston together, piston onto the crankshaft. So anyway, I set this thing up, and I backed off about 75 or 100 feet and took a shot at it. I hit it. And it was just like you drilled a perfect hole right through it. If you drilled it, it wouldn't have been no more perfect. Just a beautiful little hole right through that thing. Well, we got back and got on the plane again, and I think we went into Tunis, where I picked up another ship. We was getting ready to make the invasion of southern France. So we went on we were back to an LCT, but it was a brand new one, and we had a brand new crew to come over from the States. So they had a whole flock of these LCTs. So what they did with us 100 men, we had been in invasions before, and we had the experience and all. So they took us guys and separated us and put like 2 or 3 men on each LCT. We had the experienced men and put them on with the rookies, And then we had to train with them and teach them. And these LCTs were slightly different than the ones we had. So one of the fellows that was in my crew was a guy named Soja. So after a while, we left Africa and we went to Corsica, the French island. It was either French or Italian. I think it was a French island. And while we were on the island, I met a guy. His name was Long, Huey Long. It was Huey Long's son, who is right now a senator. I think he might be retired, but he was a whip, the House whip, for many, many years. He's from down Louisiana. When we, to backtrack a little bit, when we were in Norfolk, I had Mary with me down there, and that's where that picture there was taken down in Norfolk. One night we'd have liberty, and the next night we'd have to hop over the fence somewhere. So Thomas Cleveland, a fellow on my crew, he had his wife in Norfolk, and we got to the point where we would leave the base and I'd hitchhike back sometimes. Well, this one morning, Huey Long picked me up. I was by myself. So him and I got to be pretty good friends. So from then on, his wife was in Norfolk also. So from then on, when we go to town, I go with him, and I could get in and out the gate without a pass. So then almost every night, while Mom was in Norfolk, I was off. We go down and we had a little one-room flat down on Granby Street. But anyway, I got to be pretty good buddies with Long, and for some reason, the other officers didn't like him. I don't know why, but as a result, he wound up stuck out on Corsica there all by himself. He was in charge of some American supply depot, and we were glad to see each other. We only had about a half a day to sit around and talk. So anyway, later on that same afternoon, me as Soja and myself and another guy went up and we went into a little saloon. We was in there drinking, and Soja got pretty drunk, and we all got pretty drunk, Well, there was an old fellow that owned this bar, and his wife, and she was as ugly as sin, and there was another old guy in there. So I must have dozed off, and I heard a lot of commotion, and when I came to, I think it was Soja was trying to get to the guy behind the bar, and Chowtraw had Soja around the neck trying to stop him. So when I came to, I got up and I got the both of them out. And here the fellow behind the bar had a gun, a Beretta, and he was shaking like that, and he had an aim right at the soldier's head. He was only 5 feet away. And I looked over in the corner, and his buddy was standing in the other corner, and he's got a gun on Soldier. Well, anyway, Soldier got fresh with this guy's wife. So by this time, it must have been around 10 o'clock at night. So we left the place, and I'll never forget it had almost a solid glass front door. It had a frame around it. Kind of reminded me of the doors that the old Kroger stores used to have on them. It was all glass except for a little bit of wood, about 1.5 feet up. So anyway, the soldier goes back and he punches the door, and he broke the glass. Then he cut his hand. Well, just about that time, the MPs, military police from the Army, come by. So he said, we got to get this guy fixed up. So they didn't arrest him, but he took him to the hospital. And he didn't know where he was, how drunk he was, So they sewed up his hand, and they put a big bandage on it. So they said, like, in 2 weeks, take the bandage off. So we took him back to the ship, and of course the next day he woke up and he said, what the hell happened to my hand? So we said, don't you remember you was trying to get fresh with that man's wife and he shot you? He said, lucky he didn't shoot you in the heart, The guy would have shot him if I hadn't got him, because you could tell the guy was really scared and he was shaking. So anyway, we convinced Soldier then for like 2 weeks that he'd been shot in the hand. Well, in the meantime, we went Corsica, Sardinia. This was either one of the two islands. I'm not sure. One was French and one was Italian. And the water around the one island was, I'll never forget, we pulled up there and it was a beautiful beach. And the water was just crystal clear, a real pale blue. And we pulled up right smack in front of a convent, or a girls' school. It was run by nuns. Well, all the girls are out there whooping it up, hollering at the American sailors, and the nuns are rounding all the girls up and herding them inside and closing the gates on us. But that was one of the most beautiful spots I'd ever been to. Maybe Bermuda might have been prettier, but that was beautiful. So anyway, we went back to Italy. We had a place called Baia, B-A-I-A, and it's right in the Naples, little village on the outskirts of Naples. It's right in Naples harbor. It was from there that we made the invasion of southern France, and that was in June. Seems to me it was in June. I thought it was June the 6th, the same day, maybe a year later, than the invasion of France across the Channel. I'm not 100% on that date, but we hit between Marseille and Toulon. There's a funny story on this, but incidentally, when the big ships was out firing, they hit a bank, right? Hit the ball, and it blew the ball up, and it blew the money all over the place. And townspeople, French people, were running all around grabbing money like crazy. And on the beach, or in the town, there was I remember about the second day, third day, something like that, they had an Army 6x6 truck, which is an open stake body truck. And they had a bunch of, they had 2 rows of seats down each side. They had about 8 girls, I'd say about 16 girls, about 8 of them on each side, sitting in the back of this truck. The townspeople, the French people, not our soldiers. And they had them all shaved bald-headed. They were riding them around town in the back of that truck. And people in the town were jeering them and throwing rocks at them because they were collaborators. They fraternized with the Germans when the Germans had occupied the country, And of course, I guess sometimes you can't blame them. That was all they had, But anyway, they really give them a hard road to hoe. But I'm getting ahead of my story. Before we left Italy, we had a cook on this ship. I forget the guy's name, but I'll never forget, he was a redhead guy, and he was from up, I think, New York City. And this guy was, as far as we were concerned, he was an old man. He was about 35, I guess, somewhere along there, maybe a little older even. But he was a dyed-in-the-wool boozer, This guy would drink anything. So We left wherever the heck it was. I think it might have been from Bahia. But anyway, we left and we're at sea and we're heading for the invasion. We had a bunch of stretchers, lighters, litters, whatever the hell they call them, for the Army, medical corps. And we had a bunch of all kind of medical stuff, included 4 square gallon, 5-gallon cans of alcohol. We had two little crates, wooden crates, like a lattice work crate, wired together. And it was 10 gallons in each crate. So we had them out sitting on the deck, So we're out at sea. The cook, we don't get the breakfast the first morning. So we go to the cooks, and the cook's still in the rack. So we get him out of the rack. And the captain says, well, we have to search the lockers. So we searched his locker, and we found some wine. So we skipper threw it overboard. And next day, no breakfast again. This guy's passed out in the rack. So now, where in the hell's he getting it, So we searched the whole ship. We couldn't find anything. Finally, I happened to think of the alcohol out on the deck. And I went out, and sure enough, he had opened up one of them cases, and one of the 5-gallon cans had like a nail hole in it. So here he had just filled up. Well, before that, while we were still doing our search, we'd given up. So we wondered what he did with it, So behind his locker there was a ledge running along, about 4 inches, steel beam like. And you reach around behind his locker, and there was this skipper reached around there, and he said, "I think I got it." And he pulled it out, and there was a plastic canteen bottle. It was about that high and or about that big around, and he was holding it by the lid. And so while he's holding it, and he's saying, "Here it is," and we're looking at it, it was about half full. This thing's starting to get longer and skinnier, and it gets skinnier and longer and skinnier, and finally the thing's about 15 inches long and about 1.5 inches around. This alcohol has softened up the plastic. So then the skipper goes out and he put a piece of tape, adhesive tape, over the hole, and he took a pen or a pencil, and he drew a circle around there, all around the piece of adhesive tape, and then he put his initials on top of the tape. Then he called all the crew out, and he said, "Now this is better than nothing." He said, "This will act as a Navy SEAL." He says, "Anybody messes with that is going to be court-martialed. Anybody that takes that tape off." So the next morning, the damn cook's passed out again. So I went out and looked at the can. He didn't mess with that one. He went and punched a hole in the other one. So then I said, well, the only thing we do, we take all the alcohol and we'll put it in the skipper's cabin. So he said, okay, that's great, Now he can't get in there, So we finally, on about the 4th day, I think, we finally had breakfast. So we make the invasion, and there's not too much action. We had a nice sandy beach to work off of, and there was 2 colored guys driving an Army 6x6, and they were sent down to help us and get unloaded. So they were working along pretty good. They would back the truck up. We had the ramp down. They'd back the truck right up onto the ship, and we'd load them up, and off they'd go. And they were working pretty good there for a while, and all of a sudden they began to slow down. So I asked them if they had speeded up a little bit, because we wanted to get off of that beach. But when you're on the beach, you're a sitting duck. The planes come flying over, they strafe you, and you can't go no place. So I told them I had this alcohol on board. I said, "You guys work with me real good, and I'll give you both some good alcohol, medical alcohol." I said, okay. And every time they'd make a trip, they would pester me for the alcohol. So as a result, they got down to about our second last load it was, third last, somewhere along there, and I asked the one guy to give me his canteen cup. He took off of his belt. Now these cups are aluminum and about so big around, and they hold about a pint, I guess, or more. And I went and got the one can, and I filled it up. Filled up there alcohol. They filled up their canteen with alcohol. They give it to the one guy, and I went back in the compartment to get a can of grapefruit juice that I was going to give him to chase it with and mix it with it. You know, get him some cups. Well, I come out, and the one guy's got it up, and he's drinking away. And I run up there to try to catch him, and I'm hollering, "Quit that! That'll kill you! You know, you can't put it down." And the other guy's grabbing it away from him, and he's hollering, "Save me some! Save me some!" Well, he finally got it away from him, and he does the same thing. He starts bottoms up, you know. Well, the first guy, he's doing flip flops all over the beach. He can't breathe. I run over to the other guy, and about that time he had it all down, and he starts doing flip flops. Well, these guys were like two fish out of water. They couldn't get their breath. They were falling and staggering and doing somersaults all around the place. So about after a half hour, they come out of it pretty good. So we had their truck all loaded for them. They got back in. They took off. They were gone about 10, 15 minutes somewhere. In the meantime, we had taken all the rest of the equipment off. We had a bunch of, like I said before, these medical equipment, you know, and what we had left, we just put it out on the beach. We wanted to get the hell out of there. So these guys pulled up, and they didn't come up on the ramp. They just pulled up alongside the stuff we had there, and it was a nice sandy beach. And the driver opened the door, zoop, right on out. He hit the ground, fell out, passed out, head first, right on the ground. The other guy opened the door on his side. He did the same thing. Fell right out of the truck. Right, both of them was passed out. So we loaded the truck up for him, and that was the last we'd ever seen of them. We up and took off. Well, it was a couple days after that, while I was still in that same area there, we was unloading other ships, that we got the word that the old fellows that had been to India were all going to be sent home on leave. So they come by and they took us off of that ship, and then they put us on another one and sent us back home. So that was about I guess that was when we got married, in October. We come home and I had a 30-day leave. So we come home and Mary and I got married. And after a bit, she come back to Norfolk with me. And when I come back onto the base again, I went to another base. I think I didn't go back to Little Creek. I went up to Camp Bradford for a little while. We did some training up there. And it was while I was there, I needed some false teeth, which, as you can see, I don't have anymore. I needed a partial plate. Well, they didn't make them there in Norfolk. They had to go to Richmond, Virginia to have some false teeth made, or a partial plate. So we had a busload of fellows there, and I was a senior rank. So they put me in charge of getting these guys up to Richmond, see if they all made it there. Because none of these people on the bus, they were all Navy personnel, but they couldn't read or write. Now, how they got in the Navy, I'll never know. So they told me where to take them. We went to a Navy base in Richmond. So we pulled in on the Navy base there, and we got there just about chow time, and they were marching these fellows in, the ones that was on the base, they were marching into a chow hall for their lunch. And there was a line about 6 abreast, and it strung out for a couple of blocks. Come to find out, they had over 600 men there, in addition to what I had. They couldn't read or write. They could probably shoot a squirrel's eye out at 90 feet. Most of them were from down the hills, you know. They would have probably made good infantrymen or whatever, but they couldn't read or write. So I stayed there and had my teeth made, and went back down to Norfolk. And never did wear them damn teeth. They aggravated me, just like the ones I got now. I still don't wear the ones I have. I recall one time when I was down in Norfolk, Little Creek, Virginia there, that was the training base for our LCTs. We were expecting a prime minister. His name was Heath, I believe it was. Uh, so he was supposed to come like 10 o'clock in the morning, and he never showed. And they had every road in the base was lined with the sailors on both sides of the road, about 10 feet apart. And these guys were standing at parade rest from like about 10 o'clock in the morning till lunchtime. And they went back in the afternoon because nobody was sure just when this guy was supposed to get there. So he never did show. Well, the next day was the same thing. They had everything was all spit and polish, and all these guys are in their dress blues and had their leggings on, and they're all standing at parade rest, lining up the roads again. So all day on the second day, you don't show. So on the third day, they called it off. Well, in the meantime, our one engine was out, our generator engine. So in order to get the engine out, there was a big plate, big metal plate in the deck that you had to take up. It was a blue million bolts in that thing. So we got the plate up and pushed it off to the side to expose the engine so we could get a block and tackle down in there and hoist it up out of there. And as we got the engine up on the deck, well, it was pretty messy. You know, we got parts laying all around and everything. So by this time, most of the guys wanted to go uptown, and they asked me if it was okay. So I said, yeah, go ahead. So me and Condon stayed back to work on the engine. Well, all of a sudden, there comes a whole parade of guys walking over the pier, and we were tied inboard. And they pulled up along the side of us, and here it was the Prime Minister. Well, this guy had all the officers from the base with him, and he must have had 20 officers of his own. Looked like an admiral and a captain, and right on down the line, you know, all the way down to the gophers and the runners, whatnot. So he come up and alongside of me, and he saluted. I saluted him back, and he asked if we could come aboard, and I said, you know, sure, you come in. That was what they were going to do to begin with, was inspect, you know. Well, our cruise quarters was still in pretty good shape, you know. Of course, the guys all getting ready for Liberty left it a little bit messy. So I explained to him, I said, you know, we had engine trouble, and he said, don't worry. He said, I can see what's going on. We just want to have an idea what these LCTs are. And he looked all around. They went down the engine room, went down one side. You could go down one side, cross over in front of the three engines, and then come back up on the other side, and went all through the cruise quarters. And then our wheelhouse was up on top of the cruise quarters. He went up there and looked around. I guess they spent 20 minutes or more, 25 minutes. He thanked me real good, shook hands, and saluted, and off they went again. But I often thought, you know, all these men stand at attention for 2 days, and then they decide to come in out of nowhere. Of course, in them days, you couldn't depend on anything, you know. We were tied, like, you know, just side by side, you know, right on down. And right in front of us, about 200 yards or less, was a battleship King George, His Majesty's battleship. It was a beautiful, beautiful ship. It had so many guns, 40 millimeters on the forward deck, and they had all the gun barrels were pointing skyward. It looked like a bean field. Oh, I don't know how many 40 millimeters they had. In addition to their 16-inch guns and their 8-inch and their 5-inch guns all over the thing. And then right behind us was a big aircraft carrier, a British, I think it was His Majesty's ship, Repulse. So, okay, one night there, Photo Joe comes over, which was a German reconnaissance plane taking pictures at night. Now, this guy's about like 5 miles up. You know, there ain't no way we're going to hit him with a 20 millimeter. Each LCT had two 20 millimeters. They call them cannons, but they're more like a machine gun. They had a bullet about yay long, and about that big around, you know. We had a magazine that snapped onto the gun, and this thing would shoot them out. And every third one was a tracer. You could see it, you know. So, I don't know, somebody on the LCT cuts loose with a 20 millimeter. Well, then when one guy does it, they all do it. So, man, they're all shooting up. They ain't going no place, you know. And there wasn't a peep out out of this big carrier behind us, and there wasn't a peep out of the battleship King George, and we had cruisers and our own destroyers, cruisers all over the place, and ain't none of them firing. The only ones firing was the LCTs. So the very next morning, the executive officer of the battleship King George comes over, and there again, this reminded me of it. He had his orderlies with him, and their orderlies had their orderlies, and all down the line there must have been 15 of them. So this guy comes over, and he's standing on the dock there. He was right above me, and about 6 of our men come out, and then I called them all out, see what the heck's going on here. And he asked if the captain was aboard, and I said no. I said I was in charge at the time. So I called these guys all to attention, and we gave them a salute, and they saluted back. And this executive officer was a full captain, and he says, I have a proclamation from the captain of His Majesty's ship, the King George. It says, during last night's air raid, the starboard yard arm of His Majesty's ship, King George, battleship King George, was shot off. And with that, everybody looks up at the yard arm on the battleship, and there's something dangling like a broken leg. And it said, hereafter, in the event of an air raid, LCTs will refrain from firing. So that was the name of that tune. Incidentally, I'd have to demonstrate how we used to do this, but in the evening, after supper, these, we called them limeys, English officers on this battleship King George, well, they would come out on the main deck, and when they were on the deck, none of the enlisted men were allowed there, see, and they would take the whole front end of the battleship, which was about, maybe say 300 feet of it. And they would, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 of them, walking abreast. They would put their hands behind them, and they would march up to a certain point, and all the while they're just talking back and forth, what they were doing, taking their evening constitution. They would go up there, and they'd make an about face and walk back another 300 feet to a point there, and then back and forth, back and forth. And they all had their whites on, and they were wearing white shorts. So what would happen, about 3 or 4 of our guys wearing dungarees to get out on our deck, and we had like about 90 feet or so of clear deck, and they would get right in step with these guys. And our 3 or 4 men walking broadside in step with them, see, well, they could look right over and see us as plain as we could see them. So our men would go up, and when they'd make a turn, we'd make a turn. Then we'd come back, Well, them guys would get so damn mad that they'd take off. After a while, they just didn't bother coming out, though. But they were still in port when we left, and we went from there over to Algiers, And there was another interesting story. There was a French cruiser in there. There was actually 2 French cruisers. The cruiser Montcalm, a beautiful ship, and it was a blue and gray. They had some battle colors on it, and the Joan of Arc was painted a dirty-looking brown and tan. Well, the main turrets on the Joan of Arc were all rusted. They had big 8-inch guns, but they couldn't fire them. They fired the guns would blow overboard. We outfitted the Joan of Arc with a lot of anti-aircraft guns, 40 millimeters, some 20s, and a lot of radar. And every day the Joan of Arc would go out and run up and down the Mediterranean, and giving us a warning when the German planes were coming. There was also German subs in the Mediterranean, by the way. Anyway, I think I explained earlier about how the gates work at the end of the Maid, and about these French sailors that lived down there. They would open and close the gates. Well, they would open the gates and let the ships in and out of this harbor. Well, when the Joan of Arc came or went, always did it by herself. When she come back in, she'd come in at about 20 miles an hour and make a hard left and just spin around right in the center of the harbor and tie up alongside a pier just as beautiful as you please. When one of our cruisers come in, We had the Philadelphia was there, and the Savannah was there, and another one I don't recall offhand. When they come in, heck, they come creeping in about like 3 miles an hour, and they would have tugs with them and everything else. But it was amazing the way the skipper is. And the Montcalm was the same way. He'd come flying in there like gangbusters, spin it around and zoop, tie up, and before the thing's already even stopped all the way, these sailors are hopping overboard, going on liberty uptown. It was pretty interesting to watch us compared to our Navy. And then I was shipped out down to Houston, Brown Shipyard down in Houston, Texas, to pick up a bigger ship, an LSM, which I wound up my tour of duty on the LSM. Now on this ship, I forget the length of it, it was over 200 feet, and it had a crew of 70 on it, and I was a senior ranking petty officer above decks, the boatsman mate. I was a boatsman mate first. And we had one chief on the ship, and he was a chief motor mac. And my two friends, the twins, they were first class motor macs. They were in charge down below, and I was in charge of everything topside. Anyway, I was in Houston and picked up the ship, and we went out and trained around and give it a shakedown cruise in the Caribbean there. And we were going to take it. We run them by ourselves, no convoys, you know. We were going from Houston to San Diego, and we're out there one afternoon, and these things they looked like an aircraft carrier from a distance. From the side, they had a big conning tower that come up on the side. But anyway, we're out and off in the distance, you could see about 6 or 8 big funnels. They stretched all the way from the water all the way up to the sky. These were water spouts. And we were headed right to them. And the closer we got, the darker it got, just like a tornado. And the wind, the water was just as choppy. And these things are big water spouts. They're off in the distance. They looked like they were big around as a pencil, but as you come up on them, they were gigantic. We didn't go directly into one of them, but we was right in the middle of all of them. And that ship was rolling so bad that every time it would go over so far, and it would just sort of hang there, and then it would slowly come back. And up in the conning tower, there was a little thing with a glass tube with mercury in it, and this would roll back and forth as the ship went. It would tell you what your roll was, like a 45-degree roll. And our ship was rolling further than what this little bubble inside. It looked like a bubble inside of a level. And this little bubble was rolling beyond as far as it could go. And as a result, we spent about 3 hours thinking at any minute it's going over and it's not coming back. And the ships have been known to do this. It was about that time I got a letter from a telegram from my dad saying that Dave was born. So I asked the skipper, I says, how about getting on some liberty, you know, or if I could go home to see my baby. He said, no, he said, we're in port now and we're ready to sail any minute. So he said, I'll tell you what, he said, I'll let you go uptown and you come back, you know, tonight. He said, we're waiting on orders. He said, but don't try to go home. So I said, okay, I won't go home. So I went out and I was celebrating and I spent the whole night out. And it was about the next night, about 10 o'clock, and I come aboard, and I was in pretty unstable condition. Had a few too many beers. So I'll never forget it. It just as plain now as it happened that night. I heard the captain say, somebody take him down below and cast off the bow line. They were actually waiting for me to show. And so the next morning, we're at sea, and the captain came to me. Him and I were good friends. And he says, got to have a captain's mast. He said, I'm going to have to charge you, you know. So I said, oh, okay, you know, I didn't care. So a captain's mast don't amount to much anyway. But he had about 15 guys on captain's mast, and these guys were anywhere from 15 minutes to a couple hours late, you know. So we went down below decks and had a vacant compartment there, and they had the captain's mast, and he saved me till last. Well, these other guys were all rookies, and he was hitting them pretty good, you know. giving them pretty good fines and restricting them to the ship and everything else. So he got down to me. He said, "What the heck am I going to do to you?" So he said, "I'll tell you what." He said, "I want to restrict you to the ship for 7 days." I said, "Okay." That was it. Now we figured we're going to Honolulu. So we figure it's going to take 7 days to get there. So I was restricted to the ship for 7 days. Well, the thing was, we got there in 6. So we pulled in, and I look over, and there was a battleship New Jersey. So my brother Don was on the Jersey. Now we're anchored out in the harbor. We're not in at the base. We're out. All ships anchor out when they first come in, as a rule. So we're anchored out in the bay, and went to the skipper, and I said, "Hey, the battleship New Jersey over there, my brother's on it." So he said, "Well, pull up sick tomorrow. I still have 1 more day to go." So he said, "Pull up sick." So I went and got the signalman, and I said, "Me and you going to be sick in the morning." So we faked the sickness, and we called for a small boat, and they come out with what they call a Liberty boat. They go from one ship to the next, like a taxi cab. Of course, it don't cost you anything, So we called for the signal for the small boat to come alongside, and me and the signalman got aboard, and we went on over to the beach. And I didn't even look again. Get over on the beach, and we started heading towards where the Jersey was, and it was gone. So I said, "What the hell's going on here?" And so him and I, we just was walking along, looking around town a little bit. We come to an officers club. We wound up in there, and we got pretty well loaded. We didn't come back at 8 o'clock at night. And we left early in the morning. So I get back, wake up the next morning, and there's the New Jersey again. Back right where it was the night before. So then I told the skipper, I said, "There's the Jersey again." He said, "I can't let you go." He said, "These guys are going to start getting wise, He said, so I sent, I think it was a quartermaster, I sent him over to the New Jersey. I said, "Go over there and look up my brother and tell him where I'm at." So sure enough, only about 5 o'clock or so, my brother Don come aboard my ship, and he had another guy with him. Forget the guy's name. He lived on Pavilion Street in that same house where Cox's used to live. So I got to meet them 2 guys. I was glad of that. But well, then after a bit, we left Honolulu. We went on our way out to, we was heading for Okinawa, and we stopped at Eniwetok and Saipan and Guam. And there again, we was anchored out at Guam. We had our ramp down. This LSM also had a big ramp on it, just like our LCT and like the LST. So the big ramp and a well deck where they could run trucks or anything back and forth, So we had this ramp down. We're fishing off of the ramp, And the way that they were doing it, they had a lot of success. Well, they get some rolled oats, dry rolled oats, and throw them on the water, and little fish would come and get them, and then we had nets on a stick, reach in and grab some of them small fish, and you put the small fish on a hook, and wait him and send him down about 30 feet. You could see down a good ways, when it was daylight. When the sun's shining on the water, you could see 100 feet straight down, And they was coming up with a fish about 8 or 10 inches long, and then they would cut him in half and put him on a bigger hook, and you could go down about 80 feet or so, and there was sharks down there. Sharks about 5 or 6 feet long that they were fishing for. Well, every time I went to get one, he'd just take my bait and my line and just bite it right off and just wouldn't even slow him down, You had to have a chain or something on the end of it. But we never knew that at first. By the time we decided that we needed wire or a chain or something for a leader, by this time we're out of hooks, So anyway, it was along about then that I saw this airplane pontoon come floating by. And somebody said, "Hey, there's a pontoon. Let's go get it, and we'll make a kayak out of it." So I had a pair of dungarees on, just dungarees, nothing else, no belt or anything, cut off dungarees. So I grabbed the heaving line, which is like a clothesline and about 100 feet long. And I tied it onto my belt loop in the back. And I said, tied more lines on them. As I was swimming away, the guys there, they run and got more lines and tied one onto the other, you know. Well, by the time they had 6 of them tied together, I just put my arm around this thing. And they must have seen me put my arm around it. And I was just reaching back with my other hand to get the rope and tie that on. When I give a tug on it, and it got away. It come off of my belt strap. Well, here I am hanging onto this pontoon floating out to sea. Well, there was quite a few ships there, and pretty soon it got down to where there's only 2 ships between me and the open ocean. Well, I could have made either one of them, but I thought, the heck with this, you know. And I let go of the pontoon, and I started swimming back towards our ship. Well, with the tide going out, I wasn't making any progress, and I swimming and swimming and swimming. And finally, I guess the tide had quit and stabilized, and I was making some headway, you know. Then I got about 600 feet from the ship, I guess, or maybe somewhere along in there, maybe a little bit further yet. And up until this time, I hadn't thought of them sharks. But then all of a sudden it popped in my mind that we were fishing for them damn sharks. Well, I was getting pretty tired, but then I started making like an egg beater. Man, I was all arms and legs. So about that time they came out with the small boat. I was wondering when the hell they were going to come down with it, but it was quite a little job to put the thing down in the water. You had 2 davits and blocks and tackle and all that, but they must have seen I was getting a little low on gas, so they decided to come out. Well, actually, by the time they got around to the side of the front of the boat, I got there at the same time. I just swim right up and get onto the ramp, and that was a pretty scary expedition when I got to thinking about those sharks. I know that on that same ship we had a doctor, and I was having a little problem, and being I guess homesick for Mom. I was married that time, you know, and I remember I was sitting up on the deck one night, and he come up and he says, "How you doing?" I said, "Okay." He said, "Wait here." He said, I'll be right back." So he came back in a few minutes, and he gave me a bottle. He says, "Don't fall overboard." And I looked at the bottle, and it was a bottle of Old Granddad, and it was darn near full. Well, I thanked him and everything, you know. There again, I called my 2 buddies the twins, and the 3 of us sat up there when it was a beautiful moonlight night. The stars were out and nice and clear. And 3 of us sat there and drank that 5th. And I remember the closer we got to Japan, I recall for about 2 days there we was running through, well, we call them Spanish man-o-wars, but it is a jellyfish. Billions of them, billions. You just lay up on the bow looking down, and you see these things all as far as you can see. And there's billions of them. Anyway, we went up to Okinawa and got in a convoy up there, and we went on to up towards Nagasaki. We was the first convoy in Nagasaki, going up into their harbor after they dropped the atomic bomb. We went to a place called Sasebo, which was a seaplane base. Just a little thing right down the end of an inlet there, you know. Later on, I was talking to Bill Crowley, and he said he was at Sasebo, which is pretty remarkable because this place was way out in the boonies, you know. But anyway, we spent a few days there, and I recall on the way in, it was beautiful, the scenery, because we hadn't seen trees or anything like that to amount to too much, you know. But up there, all the trees and the mountains, was a mountainous country going into Japan, and it was just plain beautiful. This seaplane hangar right there at the edge of the water, where we come in and use their ramp to put our ramp on. I remember it was made out of corrugated sheet metal. Hanging around there, and we got word that I had enough points to get discharged. Now, I was already married, and Mark Tanksley was married, but Lem wasn't married. When we went home on that leave, I mentioned earlier why I got married and Mark Tanksley got married. So for being married, you got a couple extra points. I think maybe 2 points or 4 points. In the Navy, I forget exactly how the point system went, but I recall you needed 24 points to get out, and I had, at that time, 27. I think you got like 1 point for every 6 months, and then you got a couple of points for every month of sea duty, which you had overseas. And then if you had children, you got extra points. So as a result, I think I had 27. I had like I say, Dave was already born, so but Mark never had no children. So anyway, I even had more than Mark. But Mark and I got offered a ship at Okinawa, and then had to stay aboard. So we went into an army tent. They had a whole big field up along a hillside, kind of a long sloping hillside. It was just covered with army tents, and these were 8-man tents. They had a roof that come up to a point, and the sides all around were like about 4 feet high. They could roll the sides up, you know, and 8 men could sleep in there comfortably. So we were somewhere pretty close to the middle of all these tents. I guess there might have been 400 of them, and a typhoon was coming in. Now this was the worst typhoon in the history of the island. Of course, we didn't know that at the time, you know. So all the guys, all the 8 men in our tent, we know each other, you know, from the other ships, you know, the older guys, and been together for many months, you know. So anyway, these tents are blowing down right and left, and the wind keeps increasing, and the rain is going sideways, and it's windy, and every couple of minutes you run out, and we had some rocks. We pound the stakes back in, you know. The stakes are getting pulled loose, and then we got stakes off of the other tents that was already down to help our tent. Well, it got to be a battle of like King of the Hill. So this went on from about 1 o'clock, and along about 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, it's really getting dark out, and this fury of the storm is increasing by the minute. So every time we look out, we would scout around and see how many tents were left, you know. Well, the tent had a center pole, and sometimes, like, all 8 of us are hanging onto this pole in order to keep it upright. And the other guys, sometimes guys on each corner hanging onto it for dear life. Well, it got to the point, after a while, every now and then water would come flying in, and our clothes was all getting wet and everything. So up on the top of the hill was a chow hall, what they were building. And it wasn't quite complete. It did have a roof on it, and it had sides up about 5 feet, and then the rest of it was open, and I guess it was intended to be open. It was going to be screened in, you know, and it had a bunch of tables in it. So one by one, these tents were being forsaken, and the occupants was flying up over the hill there to get into that chow hall. Well, about 7 o'clock, we look out, and the last tent has gone down, and the only 2 guys left is me and Mark. So we said, well, let's just forget it. We won that deal, you know. Now we go up to the chow hall, and it's getting cold. I mean, and all I got on is a skivvy shirt, and I had a jacket that was soaking wet, and a pair of cut-off dungarees, and a pair of shoes and socks. And Mark was pretty much the same. Now we can't, this whole chow hall is full with guys. There's water all over the floor. The guys right smack in the middle of it are in pretty good shape. And we went out in the kitchen part of this chow hall. Actually, it was Army chow hall. It had nothing to do with the Navy. And I remember we crawled up on a chopping block so we could lay down, but the chopping block was all wet. And then we both laying side by side on this big, it was kind of a long chopping block, but it was, at least it was off the floor, because there was water all over the floor. And then the roof started leaking, and we got this cold water dripping on us, and we just hugging each other all night trying to keep warm. That was, I think, the most miserable night I spent in the whole Navy. But we talked about that later, you know. So anyway, the next day, we went back down to where our tents were. So the typhoon had caused a lot of damage. A lot of ships, even destroyers, were sunk. A lot of small boats were sunk. And it caused a lot of damage on the island itself. So they had a lot of work parties that they were getting up. But like I say, I was the senior ranked. I was a boatswain mate first. So I got to stay with the tent. And all the rest of the fellows had to leave. So it was my job to put the tent back together, you know. We already had the tent up, but we got it back up. So then I would take care of all the clothes. And it was a nice sunny morning. And they had all our clothes hanging around trying to get dried out and everything. And they left one guy in charge of each tent, you know. Well, by 11 o'clock, I think everything was pretty well secure, somewhere along in there. And I sat down, I was going to write my brother Stan a letter. He was in the Battle of the Bulge. He was an MP over in Germany at the time. So I started writing him a letter, and there was two soldiers that was about 50 feet away from me. And it was what we call the Wog Cave. It's a burial ground where these Okinawans would bury their dead. And they're built into the side of a hill, and they're built out of big rocks like Immaculata Church and school were made out of. And they would have a courtyard in front of each one. And this was a big cave, and it had all this rock, you know. And right down in the middle, they had an opening about 2 foot square. They had a big rock in front of it. So when one of their members would die, that's when they get that thing rolling the stone. They would roll this stone away and slide the body in there, and then roll the stone back and close it up again. So when you push the stone across, you look in there, you see bones all over the place. Anyway, the Army had stored boxes of dynamite in the courtyard. Now they had a little courtyard in front of each one of these, about as big as about 15 feet wide, and maybe or 20 feet wide or so, and maybe 15 or 20 feet deep. Not as big as a good-sized room, you know. And they usually had a little wall around it where the relatives could all come and sit on the wall, and they would pray and whatnot, you know. Anyway, when the Army had put boxes of dynamite in there. Now this particular pile of dynamite was about 8 feet high, and maybe 10 feet wide and 15 feet long, and it was covered with canvas, tarpaulins. But it had all gotten wet. Well, there was two soldiers there that was making a fire. I don't know if they had some C rations or K rations or what they were going to make some coffee or whatever they were up to. I know they were trying to cook something to eat. And the first thing you know, I heard them hollering, and they said dynamite's on fire. So like I said, I was sitting there writing my brother, and I peeked under the flap of the tent. You know, I had the sides all rolled up. And sure enough, it was a lot of white smoke coming up. So I took off hollering, the dynamite's on fire. So I run down to the road. This was a place called Naha Beach. There was a road that run right along the waterfront, you know, right along the edge, like you can find almost any place along the ocean. So I run down to this road, and I cut out to the right on down the road, making tracks as fast as I could. And I glanced over my shoulder, and the smoke was getting bigger and heavier. And while I was running down to the road, which maybe like about 400 feet away from where my tent was, I'm hollering, dynamite's on fire, dynamite, you know, and everybody's running. Nobody knows what the hell they're running from. So I must have been a mile down the road, and I was hollering at anybody I'd seen, the dynamite's on fire. And every time I'd look back, the smoke was bigger, you know. So finally, I couldn't hardly take another step, and I stopped. The last guy I stopped was a soldier driving an Army 6x6. He says, "You know anything about dynamite?" And he says, "No." I said, "Well, that's dynamite back there that's on fire." By this time, there's a great big, like 15 or 20 feet around, smoke going up, you know, and it's all white smoke. So I said, "You think we're far enough away?" He said, "Yeah, I guess so." You know, neither one of us had any idea. So about that time, this thing went off. And these big rocks that it was made out of, they looked like pebbles going up. And me and the soldiers was laying under the truck, because the truck had a metal bed. We figured, well, we're safe here, you know, which we were, you know. So I guess it's, like I say, about 11 o'clock or thereabouts, maybe not quite that late even. And I sat down and I thought, well, I've been through this whole war. I'm on my way home. I ain't going to go back up there and mess around, you know. So I stayed here till about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I go back up. My tent was gone, all my clothes. There was a hole that you could put Immaculata School in. And all the tents all around were gone. And there was some guys, there was one thing up there, what a latrine like. There was some guys in there playing cards, sitting around. One guy holding the ace of diamonds, and he had his head blown off. One of them rocks took his head off. Well, incidentally, when we look back, all these fellas that was left in there, and a lot of it were just coming along, didn't know what the heck was going on, or figured they were far enough away. They all stopped on that road, you know, right in direct line. If they were standing facing a fire, the ocean was right to their back, you know. So they're all standing on that road, and when this thing blew up, they all got knocked down like a bunch of 10 pins. And every one of them hit the deck. So that was another reason I didn't want to go back. Then we could see Army trucks coming by and picking up guys and taking them to the hospital. So it was a pretty ticklish situation there for a while. So anyway, I went back and there was a fellow there in a khaki uniform, and he said he was from Life magazine, and he was wanting to know what's going on. Well, they're getting all kinds of stories, but I was probably the only guy there that actually knew what really did happen outside the two soldiers. So I told them what had happened, that the soldiers had a fire going there and got the dynamite on fire. And they took my picture and I gave them a whole long story of it. I found a ditty bag, my own ditty bag. I found that, but the rest of the clothes was gone. So I come out of the Navy and I checked, to this day, I've never seen a word in print about that. But I do know that the very next day, the Army went around to all them caves where they had dynamite in most of them, or a lot of them. They took all that dynamite and they hauled it out to sea and dumped it overboard, you know. And there was another thing, I think it was the day or the next day after that. Mark and I was sitting down on the beach, and there was some soldiers that was working there, and they had an Army duck, and the Army duck had a crane on it. So they had their lunch with them, and while they were sitting there eating, there was two of them come up on a bank and was sitting there talking to us, and we just sitting there killing time, and there was one guy sitting in the duck, and another guy sitting in the cab of the crane, and the boom of the crane was directly over the head of the guy that was sitting in the duck. So when I was reading, all of a sudden, bang, the boom comes down and hits this guy in the head, fractured his skull. The blood coming out of his ears. So the thing was, the guy in the crane didn't get out of the crane, and the two soldiers on the bank didn't go to help this guy. Mark and I hopped up and tried to help him. But the more I think about it, the more they deliberately lowered the boom on this guy. I don't know, he might have been a heel or whatever, but all three of them, none of them made any effort to help him. They just kept right on eating their sandwich, and this guy laying there knocked out, blood coming out of his ears. So there was a hospital ship not far by, and there was a cruiser. So we signaled over to the cruiser to send a small boat. So they sent a small boat over, and we got the guy and put him in the boat, and they took him out to the hospital ship where they could operate on him. I don't know if the guy ever lived or died, but the more we thought about it, Mark and I, the more we decided that they lowered the boom on this guy on purpose. Now we don't have any clothes, no blankets, no anything. And the very next morning, they put us on a ship, an American ship, and they sent us back to the States. Well, we got on the ship, and we were still wearing the same clothes that we had. and her flat broke, had an old beard, and on the land of the Treasure Island, we come down over the north route, come up past Japan, you know, down past state of Washington and Northern California, come all the way down to San Francisco into Treasure Island. And wandered around Treasure Island. Of course, I called Mom as soon as I got there, and then about 2 days later, called her again. And by this time, I'm really getting mad because I'm running around looking like a crumb bum. Had the same old dirty clothes on, and the same old scraggly beard and everything. No money, no nothing, no liberty. So I told Mom, I said, I'm going over to see the executive officer for the base. I'm going to raise a lot of hell. And I went steamboating in there, and this guy could see I was mad, I guess. And he said, whoa, he said, what can I do for you? And I told him, I said, I lost all my clothes in a dynamite explosion, and no money, no clothes, no nothing. So he scribbled me out 2 pieces of paper. He says, take this one to the Red Cross, take the other one over to the prison, to the Lucky Bag. Went over to prison. They dug me out a suit of blues that fit, and then I went over to the Red Cross and they give me $10. So now I'm happy. I got some clothes and I got some money, and I got a pass to go into town, you know. So I think the day after that they put us on a train and sent us back up to Chicago. And then we went to give you a physical and they send you on back home. Got discharged, and that was November the 5th in 1945. Like I say, I had a lot of fun. It was a great experience, but there was times, you know, when it was pretty hairy, and in the long days and nights at sea when there's nothing to do except watch. You spend 4 hours on and 8 hours off. It gets monotonous and boring, and but when you are inshore like we were a lot, because we was on an LCT that was based mainly on a shore, on a beach, you know, where we had a lot of time on the beach. But you kind of hit the highlights of the fun things and more or less try to forget the gruesome part of it. So if I had it to do over again, I think I would do it. I learned a lot from my experience in the Navy. It taught me how big the world was. When you're on that ocean and you're like a saucer in the middle of a table. You look out around the horizon and you're like right in the middle of the ocean, and all you can see is ocean all around, you know. And you're traveling maybe 400 or 500 miles in a 24-hour period. And every 24 hours you look out and all you see is water all around again. It gets boring and monotonous, but when you're on watch, then you have to be constantly alert for 4 hours. You have eyeglasses, spy glasses, where you're looking for the wake of submarines or any aircraft if you're within range of the aircraft. But they're constantly straining your eyesight, and you get pretty well weather beaten. And when you're doing this 4 hours on, 8 hours off, 4 hours on, 8 hours, night and day, you can see where it would get terribly monotonous. But it was all part of being in the Navy and part of running the ship.